They said a woman without scent was as good as dead. Tonight, Kayla Vire would find out if they were right. She stood at the end of the line, the place reserved for the broken, the flawed, the unwanted. Around her, the ceremonial hall pulsed with anticipation as alphas prowled through darkness, choosing mates by instinct alone. One by one, they passed her without breaking stride, their disgust tangible even through the blindfolds. But when the last alpha arrived, the one even other alphas feared, everything changed. If you want to know how a girl with nothing became the queen who changed everything, stay until the end. Drop a comment with your city and hit that like button. Let's begin. The blind choosing happened once every 5 years, and it always ended the same way for girls like Kayla, with exile or worse. She'd known this truth since she was 7, the day her mother pulled her aside after the other children refused to play with her anymore. "You're different," her mother had whispered, not with love, but with resignation. "In this world, different means dead. Learn to be invisible, Kayla. It's the only way you'll survive." 12 years later, standing in the ceremonial hall of the Vire Pack, Kayla had perfected invisibility. She kept her head down, her shoulders hunched, her presence as small as possible. It hadn't saved her from tonight. The hall stretched before her like a throat waiting to swallow her whole. Torches lined the stone walls, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the gathered pack. At the front of the room, Alpha Garen Vire, her father in blood only, sat on a carved wooden throne, his expression carved from the same indifference he'd shown her since birth. To his right stood the Council of Elders, 5 ancient alphas whose collective judgment had shaped pack law for generations. To his left, her half-sister Mira preened in a ceremonial gown of deep crimson, her scent, vanilla and wildflowers, so strong it perfumed half the hall. Mira had been preparing for this night her entire life. She would be chosen first, probably by Alpha Tauren of the Northern Packs. Everyone knew it. Kayla stood at the opposite end of the line of unmated females, 23 in total. The choosing always started at the front, where the most desirable women waited. By the time any alpha reached the end, if they bothered to walk that far, the sun would be rising and patience would be gone. She was 20th in line. Behind her stood only 3 others. Lila, who'd lost an arm in a hunting accident. Sarah, whose family had been disgraced after her father was caught stealing from the pack stores. And old Marin, a widow who'd been placed in line as a formality, though everyone knew no alpha would choose a woman past childbearing years. They called this end of the line the Forgotten. Kayla had heard the whispers since childhood, better to die in the wastelands than live as one of the forgotten. "Stand straight," old Marin muttered beside her. "At least pretend you have dignity." Kayla straightened slightly, though she knew it wouldn't matter. Alphas didn't choose with their eyes tonight. That was the entire point of the blind choosing. They chose with their instincts, their noses, their primal understanding of compatibility and strength. And Kayla had none of the things they sought. No scent, no presence, no power. She was a void in a world that worshipped sensation. The ceremonial drums began, deep and rhythmic, shaking the floor beneath her feet. The crowd quieted. Alpha Garen rose from his throne, his voice booming across the hall. "Tonight, we honor the oldest tradition of our people," he announced. "The blind choosing, where instinct guides us to our truest mates. Alphas of the realm, you will walk among the unmated females of the Vire Pack. Your eyes will be bound. Your judgment will come from within. Choose wisely, for the bond you forged tonight cannot be broken." He gestured, and 6 alphas stepped forward from the crowd. They were younger than Kayla had expected, most in their late 20s or early 30s. Each wore traditional ceremonial leather, their pack insignias burned into the shoulders. Attendants moved forward with black silk blindfolds. Kayla watched as each alpha submitted to the binding. Their expressions ranged from eager to arrogant. This was a game to them, a chance to prove their instincts were superior. The alpha who chose the strongest mate would gain status. The alpha who chose poorly would be mocked for years. No one wanted to be the alpha who chose nothing. The first alpha, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his jaw, stepped toward the line. He moved slowly, deliberately, his head tilting as he passed each woman. When he reached Mira, he stopped. His nostrils flared. A slow smile crossed his face. "This one," he said, his voice rough with satisfaction. "She smells like victory." Mira's face lit up with triumph. The crowd erupted in approving murmurs. Alpha Garen nodded once, and attendants came forward to place a ceremonial cord around Mira's wrist, binding her to her chosen mate. She stepped out of line, her head held high, already imagining her future. Kayla felt nothing. She'd expected this. The second alpha moved through the line more quickly. He chose Vera, a girl known for her skill in tracking. The third alpha took longer, sampling the air around each woman like a connoisseur of wine, before selecting Kira, whose family controlled the richest hunting grounds in the territory. One by one, the alphas made their choices. The line grew shorter. The rejected women shifted uncomfortably, their hope dimming with each passing moment. By the time the fifth alpha approached, only 9 women remained. Kayla stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the far wall. She'd learned long ago not to hope. Hope was a luxury for girls who had something to lose. The fifth alpha passed her without slowing, didn't even pause. It was as if she didn't exist. The sixth alpha did the same. The crowd began to murmur. The forgotten were living up to their name. Alpha Garen shifted on his throne, his jaw tight. Having a daughter go unchosen was an embarrassment, even if that daughter was Kayla. He caught the eye of one of the younger alphas in the crowd and jerked his head toward the line. The young alpha, barely 20, Kayla guessed, climbed the steps reluctantly. An attendant bound his eyes, and he approached the remaining women with visible discomfort. This wasn't a choice made from instinct. This was a favor being called in. He stopped in front of Sarah, hesitated, then moved on. He paused near Lila, seemed to consider it, then continued. When he reached Kayla, he went completely still. For a moment, Kayla's heart lurched. Could he? Then he leaned in, inhaled deeply, and stepped back like he'd been struck. "There's nothing here," he said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "I smell stone. I smell air. But there's no woman here." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Kayla's face burned, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd heard worse. The young alpha moved past her to old Marin, made a token gesture of consideration, then shook his head and returned to the crowd without choosing anyone. 7 women remained. The sun was beginning to creep over the horizon, pale light filtering through the high windows. The blind choosing was supposed to end at dawn. Soon, Alpha Garen would declare the ceremony complete, and the unchosen would be given their sentence: exile to the wastelands. A slow death, but a certain one. Kayla had already made her peace with it. The wastelands would be kinder than staying here, living as a reminder of everything wrong with her. At least out there, alone, she wouldn't have to see the disgust in people's eyes. She was about to step out of line, ready to accept her fate early, when the great doors at the back of the hall slammed open. The sound was like thunder. Every head turned. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the rising sun. For a moment, Kayla couldn't make out details. Just a silhouette, tall and broad, radiating a presence so overwhelming it sucked the air from the room. Then he stepped forward, and the crowd collectively drew back. King Draven Kaelor. Kayla had never seen him in person, but everyone knew the stories. The warlord who'd unified the fractured territories through blood and terror. The Alpha so powerful that even the Council of Elders didn't dare challenge him. The man who'd once walked into an enemy stronghold alone and emerged 3 days later, the entire fortress in flames behind him. They said he never smiled, never showed mercy, never took a mate, because no woman could withstand his presence for more than a few minutes without breaking. He wore black from head to toe, leather armor reinforced with dark metal, a cloak that dragged across the stone floor behind him. His face was angular, brutal in its symmetry, with eyes so dark they looked black in the torchlight. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, stark white against tanned skin. But it was his expression that made Kayla's breath catch. He looked wrong. Not angry, not dangerous, though he was clearly both. He looked like a man in pain. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. His hands were fists at his sides. Every step he took seemed to cost him something. Alpha Garen shot to his feet, nearly stumbling in his haste. "King Draven, we didn't expect, we weren't informed." "I'm here for the choosing," Draven said. His voice was low, rough, like gravel grinding against stone. "I assume I'm not too late." "Of course not, Your Majesty. Of course not." Garen gestured frantically to an attendant. "Please, if you'll allow—" An attendant rushed forward with a blindfold. Draven took it without looking at the man and tied it over his own eyes with quick, practiced movements. Then he stood at the head of the line, his head tilted slightly, and Kayla realized with growing dread what was happening. He was listening, not smelling, not sensing, listening. He took a step forward, and the first woman in line, a beta named Cass, who'd been so confident an hour ago, made a small whimpering sound. Draven's expression twisted, his lip curling back. He moved past her quickly, like her presence caused him physical pain. The second woman, the third, each time the same reaction. A wince, a tightening of his jaw, a quick, almost desperate need to move away. The crowd watched in stunned silence. This wasn't how the choosing was supposed to go. Alphas were supposed to be drawn to compatible scents, not repelled by them. But Draven wasn't like other alphas. Kayla could see that now. Every scent in the room seemed to assault him. The perfumes the women wore, the oils in the torches, the sweat of the crowd, it was all too much. He was drowning in sensation, and he hated every second of it. He moved faster now, almost running through the line. Past Lila, past Sarah, past old Marin, who wisely stayed silent. Then he reached Kayla, and everything stopped. He went absolutely still, his head tilted, confusion crossing his features. He took a step closer, then another. The crowd murmured, confused. Kayla's heart hammered in her chest. She didn't understand what was happening. There was nothing for him to sense. She had no scent, no presence. Why wasn't he moving on? Draven reached out, and Kayla flinched before she could stop herself. But his hand didn't touch her. It hovered in the air beside her, as if he was feeling for something invisible. Your heartbeat, he said quietly. Not to the crowd, to her. I can hear it. Kayla swallowed. Everyone has a heartbeat. Not like yours. His expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something close. Something that looked like relief. It's the only thing in this entire damned hall that doesn't make me want to tear my own ears off. He reached up and removed his blindfold. The crowd gasped. Breaking the blindfold before making a choice was unheard of. It invalidated the entire tradition. But Draven didn't seem to care. He looked at Kayla, really looked at her. And for the first time in her life, someone saw her not as an absence, but as something real. What's your name? He asked. Kayla. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Kayla Vire. He nodded once, then turned to face the crowd. Alpha Garen was halfway out of his throne, his face purple with outrage. The Council of Elders had risen as well, their expressions scandalized. I choose this one, Draven announced. Kayla Vire will be my mate. The hall erupted. She has no scent, someone shouted from the crowd. She's defective, another voice added. This is an insult to tradition. Alpha Garen found his voice. Your Majesty, with all respect, you cannot choose her. She is not suitable. There are better... I didn't ask for your opinion, Draven cut him off. His voice didn't rise, but it carried absolute authority. I made my choice. According to your own laws, that choice is final. But the tradition? Your tradition is that alphas choose by instinct alone. Draven's expression was cold. Every other alpha in this room relies on scent. I don't. My instincts tell me this woman is the only one here who won't drive me insane. That seems like a good enough reason to choose her. One of the elders stepped forward, his face grave. King Draven, we understand your unique circumstances, but the girl is flawed. She will bring no strength to your line. No, shut up. The elder's mouth snapped closed. Draven turned back to Kayla. She stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. I'm giving you a choice, Draven said, his voice quieter now. You can accept this bond. Come with me and leave this pack behind. Or you can refuse, and I'll walk out of here alone. No one will force you, but decide now. Kayla looked past him at the crowd, at her father, whose face was a mask of barely controlled rage, at Mira, who looked like she'd just watched her entire world collapse, at the other women in line whose expressions ranged from shock to jealousy to pity. Then she looked at the man in front of her, the most powerful alpha in the realm, who could have anyone and had chosen her. Not because she was beautiful or powerful or worthy, but because she was quiet. Because in a world that screamed at him constantly, she was the only silence he'd found. It was the worst reason to choose someone, It was also the only reason that made sense. I accept, Kayla said. Draven nodded. He held out his hand. Kayla took it. His grip was warm, solid, nothing like the cold indifference she'd known her entire life. He pulled her forward out of the line, and for the first time since the ceremony began, Kayla felt like she was standing on solid ground. Alpha Garen shot to his feet. This is outrageous. I will not allow— You will allow it, Draven said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Or I will burn this hall to the ground with everyone in it. Your choice, Garen. The threat hung in the air. No one doubted he meant it. Garen sat down slowly, his face ashen. The attendants came forward with the ceremonial cord, though their hands shook as they tied it around Kayla's wrist, and then Draven's. The bond was official now, witnessed by the pack, sanctioned by tradition, however broken that tradition had become. Draven turned without another word, pulling Kayla toward the doors. She followed, her legs moving on instinct because her mind was still trying to catch up. As they passed through the crowd, people pressed back, giving them a wide berth. Some looked afraid. Others looked disgusted. A few looked curious. Kayla caught her mother's eye in the crowd. For just a moment, she thought she saw something. Regret, maybe, or worry. But then her mother looked away, and the moment was gone. They stepped out into the cold morning air. Draven's men waited outside, a dozen warriors in black armor, mounted on horses that looked like they'd been bred for war. They didn't react to Kayla's presence, which told her they'd been expecting something unusual. Draven led her to a massive black stallion and lifted her onto the saddle with effortless strength. Then he mounted behind her, his arms coming around her to grip the reins. Hold on, he said. Then they were moving, the horse surging forward into a gallop. The Virepack territory fell away behind them, the ceremonial hall growing smaller and smaller until it was just a dark spot on the horizon. Kayla didn't look back. She'd spent 19 years in that place, and not once had it felt like home. Now she was leaving with a man she didn't know, riding toward a future she couldn't imagine, and somehow it felt less terrifying than staying. They rode for hours in silence. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. The landscape changed from forest to plains, then to rocky hills that jutted up from the earth like broken teeth. Finally, as the sun reached its peak, Draven slowed the horse to a walk. He guided them off the main path toward a small stream that cut through the rocks. We'll rest here, he said, dismounting. He reached up to help Kayla down, and she let him, though her legs were so stiff from riding she nearly collapsed when her feet hit the ground. Draven steadied her, his hands on her shoulders. You'll get used to it. To riding? To everything. He released her and moved to the stream, kneeling to splash water on his face. Kayla stayed where she was, watching him. Now that they were alone, away from the crowd and the pressure, she could see the exhaustion in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged slightly, the tightness around his eyes. Why did you really choose me? She asked. Draven looked up at her, water dripping from his chin. I told you, you're quiet. That's not a reason to bind yourself to someone for life. It is when you've spent your entire life wanting to claw your own skull open just to make the noise stop. He stood, wiping his face with his cloak. I'm not like other alphas, Kayla. I never have been. My senses, smell, hearing, touch, they're all too strong. Everything is too loud, too bright, too much. Most days being awake feels like being flayed alive. He moved closer, his expression serious. But when I walked into that hall tonight, I could smell every person there. Their fear, their lust, their judgment. It was suffocating. I was about to leave, to tell Garen to shove his tradition where the sun doesn't shine, and then I reached you. And you smelled nothing, Kayla finished quietly. I smelled nothing, he agreed. And for the first time in months, I could breathe. Do you understand? You're not broken, Kayla. You're a God's damned miracle. Kayla looked away, her throat tight. Your council won't see it that way. My council will see it however I tell them to see it. Your people will adjust. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I know this isn't what you wanted. I know I'm not what you would have chosen, but I'm offering you something no one else in that hall would. A chance to matter. To be more than the girl everyone forgot. Why do you care what I become? Because you're my mate now. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And I don't fail the people who belong to me. Kayla studied his face, looking for deception and finding none. He meant every word. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I don't know how to be a queen, she said finally. Good. Then we'll figure it out together. He held out his hand again, and after a moment, Kayla took it. They stood there by the stream, two people who didn't fit in the world they'd been born into, bound together by a broken tradition and a desperate need for something different. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe it never would be. But it was a beginning. And for a girl who'd spent her entire life being nothing, a beginning was more than she'd ever dared to hope for. The journey to Draven's fortress took 3 days, and by the end of it, Kayla understood why people feared him. It wasn't just his power or his reputation. It was the land itself. The further they traveled from the territories she knew, the more hostile the world became. The forest grew dense and dark, the trees twisted into shapes that looked almost deliberate, like warning signs carved by something ancient. The paths narrowed until they were barely more than animal trails. And at night, when they made camp, Kayla could hear things moving in the darkness, things that stayed just beyond the firelight, watching. Draven's men never seemed bothered. They moved with the efficiency of soldiers who'd seen worse. They spoke little, ate less, and treated Kayla with a careful neutrality that felt more unsettling than outright hostility. They called her my lady when they had to address her, but their eyes always slid away, like looking at her too long might bring bad luck. On the second night, one of them, a scarred veteran named Corin, finally broke the silence around the fire. You really can't smell anything? He asked, his tone more curious than cruel. Kayla looked up from the dried meat she'd been chewing. No. Not even smoke? Blood? Nothing. Corin shook his head slowly. That's got to be strange. How do you know if something's dangerous? I use my eyes, my ears, my brain. One of the younger soldiers snorted. Good luck with that when a predator's downwind. She's made it 19 years, Draven said from across the fire. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the conversation like a blade. I'd say her methods work well enough. The soldiers fell silent. No one argued with Draven, not even his own men. But Kayla caught the looks they exchanged when they thought she wasn't watching. The doubt. The concern. They were wondering the same thing everyone back at the Virepack had wondered. What was their king thinking, binding himself to someone so obviously flawed? She didn't blame them. She was wondering the same thing. On the third day, the fortress came into view, and Kayla's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a fortress. It was a scar on the landscape. Built into the side of a mountain, the structure looked like it had been carved from the rock itself. Black stone that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Towers jutted up at irregular angles, their tops disappearing into the low-hanging clouds. Massive walls surrounded the compound, 30 feet high and studded with iron spikes. The only entrance was a gate that looked like it could withstand a siege from an army. Welcome to Shadowhold, Draven said, bringing his horse alongside hers. It's not much, but it keeps the rain out. Kayla stared at the fortress. You live here? For the past 8 years. It looks like a prison. It was. 100 years ago, the southern clans used it to house their worst criminals. When I took control of the region, everyone expected me to tear it down. He smiled slightly, though there was no humor in it. Instead, I moved in. Seemed fitting. They rode through the gates, and Kayla felt the weight of the place settle over her like a heavy cloak. Inside the walls, the compound was larger than she'd expected. A small city built for war. Training yards, barracks, forges, stables. Soldiers moved through the space with purpose, their armor dark and functional. No banners, no decorations. Everything here served a purpose. The people stopped to watch as Draven rode past. Their reactions were immediate. Backs straightened, heads bowed, conversations died. But when their eyes found Kayla, confusion rippled through the crowd. Who's that? Is that the new queen? She doesn't look like much. Kayla kept her expression neutral, but her hands tightened on the saddle. She'd known this was coming. Being chosen didn't mean being accepted. Draven dismounted in front of the main keep and reached up to help Kayla down. His hands were steady on her waist, his grip firm enough to ground her. Ignore them, he said quietly. They'll adjust. Will they? They don't have a choice. He led her up the steps into the keep, and the temperature dropped immediately. The interior was all stone and shadow, lit by torches that did little to push back the darkness. Servants moved through the halls like ghosts, their faces carefully blank. A woman waited at the top of the main staircase, tall, severe, with silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. She wore a dark gray dress that looked like armor, and her eyes were chips of ice. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice clipped. "Welcome back." "Marin," Draven nodded to her. "This is Kayla. She'll need quarters prepared, a bath drawn, and appropriate clothing. See to it." Marin's gaze flicked to Kayla, and for just a moment something cold passed through her expression. Then it was gone, replaced by professional courtesy. "Of course, Your Majesty. Though perhaps we should discuss the arrangements first?" "There's nothing to discuss. She's my mate. That makes her queen. Prepare the queen's chambers." "The queen's chambers haven't been used in... Then it's time they were." Marin's lips pressed into a thin line, but she bowed. "As you wish." Draven turned to Kayla. "Marin runs the household. Anything you need, ask her. I have matters to attend to, but I'll find you before dinner." He left before Kayla could respond, his cloak billowing behind him as he disappeared down a side corridor. Kayla watched him go, feeling suddenly exposed. Marin's gaze settled on her, assessing. "Follow me." They climbed 2 more flights of stairs in silence. The keep seemed to go on forever, a maze of corridors and chambers that all looked identical. Kayla tried to memorize the route, but gave up after the 4th turn. Finally, Marin stopped in front of a set of double doors carved with intricate patterns. Wolves running through forests, moons rising over mountains. She pushed them open, and Kayla stepped into a room that took her breath away. The queen's chambers were enormous. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, draped in dark velvet. Windows lined the far side, overlooking the mountains beyond. A sitting area with chairs and a small table occupied one corner. Tapestries covered the walls, depicting battles and ceremonies Kayla didn't recognize. But it was the dust that caught her attention. Everything was covered in it. The furniture, the floor, even the air seemed thick with years of disuse. "No one's lived here in a decade," Marin said, watching Kayla's reaction. "The previous queen, well, she didn't last long." Kayla turned to face her. "What happened to her?" "She couldn't handle the isolation, or the king. She took her own life 6 months after the wedding." The words hung in the air like a threat. "I see," Kayla said quietly. "Do you?" Marin moved closer, her voice dropping. "You seem like a sensible girl, so let me be clear. I don't know what game you're playing, but this fortress doesn't need a queen. We've managed perfectly well without one. His Majesty made a mistake bringing you here, but he'll realize that soon enough. When he does, you'll be sent away. Until then, stay out of the way and don't cause trouble." Kayla met her gaze steadily. "Is that a threat?" "It's advice. Take it or don't." Marin moved toward the door. "I'll send servants to clean this room and draw your bath. Dinner is at sundown. Don't be late." She left, closing the doors behind her with a decisive thud. Kayla stood alone in the dusty chamber, surrounded by the ghost of a woman who'd given up, and felt the weight of her situation settle fully onto her shoulders. This wasn't going to be like the Vire Pack, where people simply ignored her. Here, she was a threat, an unwanted variable in a system that had learned to function without her. And Marin had just made it clear, she wouldn't be welcome. The question was, what was Kayla going to do about it? She moved to the windows and looked out over the compound below. Soldiers trained in the yards, their movements sharp and precise. In the distance, she could see the edge of the forest, dark and impenetrable. This was her life now. A fortress built on fear, ruled by a man everyone was terrified of, filled with people who resented her existence. She should have been terrified, should have been planning her escape. Instead, for the first time in her life, Kayla felt something close to determination. She'd spent 19 years being nothing. Maybe it was time to figure out what something looked like. The servants arrived an hour later, 3 young women who worked in nervous silence, scrubbing and dusting and transforming the room from a tomb into something livable. They barely looked at Kayla, speaking only when necessary. "The bath is ready, my lady." "We've laid out clothing for you, my lady." "Is there anything else you need, my lady?" Kayla thanked them each time, but they flinched at her gratitude like it was something dangerous. When they finally left, she sank into the steaming bath and let the hot water ease the ache from 3 days of riding. The clothing they'd provided was simple but well made. A deep green dress with long sleeves and a high collar, practical leather boots, a dark cloak. Nothing like the ornate gowns she'd seen other highborn women wear, but Kayla preferred it that way. She'd never been comfortable drawing attention. By the time she'd dressed and dried her hair, the sun was setting. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in." A young man entered, barely older than Kayla, with nervous eyes and a servant's posture. "His Majesty requests your presence in the Great Hall for dinner, my lady. I'm to escort you." Kayla followed him through the winding corridors, trying again to memorize the path. They descended the main staircase and passed through a set of heavy wooden doors into a hall that made the Vire ceremonial chamber look like a barn. The Great Hall was cavernous. Long tables lined the walls, already filled with soldiers and officers. A raised platform at the far end held a single table where Draven sat, along with several men who looked like advisors or commanders. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. Every eye in the room turned to Kayla as she entered. The conversations didn't stop exactly, but they changed, voices dropping, words becoming more guarded. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their doubt. Draven stood as she approached the raised platform. "Kayla, come, sit." A chair had been placed beside his, the queen's seat. Kayla climbed the steps and sat, painfully aware of how exposed she felt. From here she could see the entire hall, hundreds of faces, all watching her. "This is Commander Thorn," Draven said, gesturing to a grizzled man on his right. "He leads my military forces. And this is Lord Castor, my chief advisor. Gentlemen, my mate, Kayla." Thorn nodded curtly. "My lady," Castor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A pleasure. We've heard much about the unusual circumstances of your choosing." "I'm sure you have," Kayla said evenly. Servants brought food, roasted meat, dark bread, vegetables that looked like they'd been grown in caves. The meal was hearty but plain, nothing like the elaborate spread she'd seen at pack feasts. As they ate, Castor leaned forward. "Tell me, Lady Kayla, what are your thoughts on the southern border disputes? I understand your father's pack has territories near that region." Kayla paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. It was a test. She could feel it. "My father's pack never involved me in territorial matters," she said carefully. "I wouldn't presume to have an educated opinion. But surely you have some thoughts, even instinctive ones?" There was a subtle emphasis on the word instinctive, a reminder that alphas were supposed to have inherent understanding of these things, a reminder that she didn't. "My instincts tell me that border disputes usually come down to resources or pride," Kayla said, "and that pride tends to cost more lives than it's worth." Silence fell around the table. Castor's smile faded. "An interesting perspective," he said finally, "though perhaps a bit naive." "Perhaps," Kayla agreed. "I've been called worse." Thorn made a sound that might have been a laugh. Draven's expression remained neutral, but she caught the slight quirk at the corner of his mouth. The meal continued in tense silence. Kayla ate mechanically, tasting nothing. She could feel the entire hall watching, waiting for her to fail, to prove she didn't belong here. When the plates were cleared, Draven stood. The hall immediately fell silent. "I know there are questions," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "About my choice, about the woman I've brought here. So let me be clear. Kayla is my mate. She is your queen. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me, and you all know how I handle disrespect." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Heads nodded. No one spoke. "That said," Draven continued, "I understand trust is earned, not demanded. So I'm giving you all an opportunity. Tomorrow, Kayla will undergo the trial of worth." Kayla's head snapped toward him. "The what?" Castor's eyes gleamed with something dark. "Your Majesty, the trial of worth is meant for—" "I know what it's meant for." Draven's gaze swept the room. "Anyone who wishes to challenge my mate's right to stand beside me can do so tomorrow at dawn. One trial, one chance. Whatever the outcome, the matter is settled. No more questions, no more doubts." He looked down at Kayla. "Unless you object?" Every instinct Kayla had screamed at her to object. She didn't know what this trial was, but the satisfaction on Castor's face told her it wasn't something she could easily survive. But refusing would prove everyone right. It would mark her as weak, as unworthy. And she'd spent her entire life being unworthy. "I don't object," she heard herself say. Draven nodded. "Then it's settled. Tomorrow at dawn, in the main yard. Anyone who doubts her can step forward." He sat back down, and the hall erupted into conversation. Kayla barely heard it. Her heart was pounding, her mind racing. "What did I just agree to?" she asked quietly. "A chance to prove yourself," Draven said, "or to fail spectacularly, one or the other." "That's not comforting." "It wasn't meant to be." He leaned closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "The trial of worth is a combat challenge. Anyone can issue it against a new member of the court. Usually it's just a formality, a few rounds of sparring to prove basic competence. But knowing Castor, he'll find someone who wants to make an example of you." "I can't fight," Kayla said. "I barely know how to hold a sword." "Then you'll lose." She stared at him. "And you're okay with that?" "No." His expression was serious. "But I can't fight this battle for you, Kayla. If I defend you every time someone questions your place here, you'll never be more than the king's pet project. You need to prove you belong, even if the odds are against you." "So you're throwing me to the wolves. I'm giving you a chance to become one." Kayla wanted to argue, to rage at the unfairness of it all. But she could see the logic, brutal as it was. This wasn't about fairness. This was about survival. "Fine," she said. "Then teach me." Draven raised an eyebrow. "Teach you what?" "How to fight. How to survive. I have until dawn. That's at least 12 hours. If I'm going to face this trial, I'm not going in blind." For the first time since she'd met him, Draven smiled. Not a cold smile, not a dangerous one. Something real. "All right," he said. "Finish your dinner, then meet me in the training yard." The training yard was empty when Kayla arrived, lit only by torches mounted on the surrounding walls. Draven was already there, 2 wooden practice swords in his hands. He tossed one to her. She caught it awkwardly, nearly dropping it. "First lesson," Draven said. "Stop thinking like prey." "What?" "You've spent your entire life trying to be invisible, making yourself small, avoiding confrontation. That works when you're trying to survive in a place that hates you. But tomorrow, you're going to be in a fight. And in a fight, being small just makes you an easier target." He moved toward her, and Kayla instinctively stepped back. "See?" Draven said. "You retreat. That's your instinct. We need to break that." He swung the practice sword at her, not hard, but fast enough that she had to raise her own blade to block. The impact jarred her arms, nearly knocking the sword from her hands. "Again," Draven said. He swung. She blocked barely. "Again." Swing. Block. Swing. Block. Over and over until Kayla's arms burned and sweat dripped down her spine. "You're still retreating," Draven said. "Stop backing up. Hold your ground." "I can't." "Yes, you can." He swung again, and this time Kayla planted her feet, gritting her teeth as the impact shuddered through her. "Better. Now push back." "What?" "When I swing, don't just block. Push my blade away. Use my momentum against me." They went again. This time, when Draven's sword connected with hers, Kayla shoved back, throwing his blade to the side. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. "Good," Draven said. "Again." They trained for hours. Draven was relentless, pushing her past the point of exhaustion, then pushing further. He taught her the basics, how to hold the sword, how to move, how to read her opponent's body language. But more than that, he taught her how to stop being afraid. "Fear is useful," he said during a brief rest. "It keeps you alive, but it can't control you. Tomorrow, whoever steps into that circle with you will expect you to be terrified. They'll expect you to freeze, to fail. Don't give them that satisfaction." "What if I lose anyway?" "Then you lose." He met her eyes. "But you'll lose fighting, not cowering. There's a difference." They went back to training. By the time the sky began to lighten, Kayla could barely lift her arms. Every muscle in her body screamed. But she'd learned enough to be dangerous, or at least to not embarrass herself completely. Draven finally called a halt. That's enough. Get a few hours of sleep. You'll need it. Kayla nodded, too exhausted to speak. She turned toward the keep, but Draven's voice stopped her. Kayla. She looked back. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, remember, you've already survived worse than anything they can throw at you. You survived 19 years in a pack that wanted you gone. This is just one more day. It wasn't much of a pep talk, but coming from Draven, it felt like a vote of confidence. Kayla made it back to her chambers, collapsed onto the bed, still wearing her training clothes, and fell into a dreamless sleep. She woke to pounding on her door. My lady, it's time! Kayla dragged herself out of bed, her body protesting every movement. The servants helped her into fresh clothing, practical this time, leather pants and a reinforced tunic that would offer some protection. They pulled her hair back into a tight braid. No one spoke. The air in the room was heavy with anticipation. When Kayla stepped out into the hallway, she found Draven waiting. He looked her over, nodded once, and gestured for her to follow. They walked to the main yard in silence. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. The yard was already packed with people. Every soldier, servant, and officer in the fortress had turned out to watch. A circle had been marked in the dirt, about 30 feet across. Draven led Kayla to the edge of it and turned to face the crowd. The trial of worth, he announced. Anyone who wishes to challenge Kayla's place as queen may step forward now. For a moment, no one moved. Kayla felt a flicker of hope. Maybe no one would actually. A figure pushed through the crowd and stepped into the circle. It was a woman. Tall, broad-shouldered, with muscles that spoke of years of training. Her hair was cut short, her face scarred from old battles. She wore light armor and carried a real sword, not a practice blade. I am Saren, she said, her voice carrying across the yard, commander of the Eastern Garrison, and I challenge the pretender's right to stand beside our king. The crowd roared approval. This was what they'd come to see. Kayla stepped into the circle, her practice sword feeling pathetically light in her hand. Across from her, Saren smiled, cold and predatory. Nothing personal, Saren called out, but you don't belong here. Better you learn that now than later. Draven handed Kayla a real sword, heavier than the practice blade, the edge sharp enough to kill. Remember what I taught you, he said quietly. Don't retreat. Then he stepped back, and Kayla was alone. Saren circled her slowly, studying her stance, her grip, looking for weakness. Kayla forced herself to stay still, to not give ground. Whenever you're ready, Saren said. She attacked. The first strike came fast, aimed at Kayla's left side. Kayla barely got her sword up in time, the impact nearly knocking her off her feet. Saren didn't wait. She pressed forward, strike after strike, forcing Kayla back toward the edge of the circle. The crowd was shouting now, a roar of voices that made it impossible to think. Kayla's training felt useless against Saren's speed and strength. Every block sent shocks through her arms. Every retreat brought her closer to the edge. Is this the best our queen can do? Saren taunted, her blade singing through the air. Pathetic. Kayla's foot touched the edge of the circle. One more step and she'd be out, disqualified, defeated. Draven's words echoed in her mind. Don't retreat. Stop being afraid. Saren swung again, a heavy overhead strike meant to end it. Kayla didn't block. She stepped into the attack, inside Saren's reach where the sword couldn't hit her, and drove her shoulder into the woman's chest. Saren stumbled back, surprised. For just a moment, she was off balance. Kayla swung her sword, not graceful, not skilled, but with every ounce of desperate strength she had left. The blade connected with Saren's side, cutting through the leather armor and drawing blood. Saren gasped, clutching her ribs. The crowd went silent. Kayla stood in the center of the circle, breathing hard, her sword still raised. Blood dripped from the blade onto the dirt. Yield, Kayla said. Her voice shook, but it carried. Or we keep going. Saren stared at her, disbelief and grudging respect warring on her face. Then slowly she lowered her sword. I yield, she said. The crowd erupted, some in approval, others in shock. Kayla barely heard them. Her legs were shaking so badly she thought she might collapse. Draven stepped into the circle and took her sword before she could drop it. Well done, he said quietly. Kayla looked up at him, still too stunned to process what had just happened. I won. You survived. That's better. He turned to the crowd, raising his voice. The trial is complete. Anyone else? No one stepped forward. Then it's settled. Draven's hand settled on Kayla's shoulder, steadying her. Kayla has proven her worth. She is your queen. Treat her as such. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly. Some looked impressed. Others looked angry. But none of them looked like they were going to challenge her again. As the yard emptied, Kayla finally let herself breathe. Her hands were still shaking, adrenaline and exhaustion mixing into something that felt like hysteria. I can't believe that worked, she said. You took a risk, Draven said. It paid off. That's all combat is. Calculated risks and luck. I thought you said fear couldn't control me. It can't. But fear kept you sharp. Without it, you might have been reckless. He studied her face. How do you feel? Kayla thought about it. Her body hurt. Her arms felt like lead. She'd nearly been humiliated in front of hundreds of people. But she'd also won. I feel, she said slowly, like maybe I can do this. Draven smiled. Good, because tomorrow, the real work begins. The real work, it turned out, was worse than any trial by combat. For the next 2 weeks, Kayla learned what it meant to be queen of a fortress that didn't want one. The soldiers acknowledged her with stiff nods and empty courtesies, but their eyes held nothing but doubt. The servants obeyed her orders, then immediately checked with Merrin to see if they should actually follow through. The officers smiled to her face and mocked her behind closed doors. She heard them once, their laughter echoing through the stone corridors when they thought she was out of earshot. The king's little ghost, one of them had said, can't smell danger, can't read a room, can't even tell when she's being insulted. Give it a month before she runs back to whatever hole she crawled out of. Kayla had kept walking, her face burning, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. Draven spent most of his days managing the territories, disputes that needed settling, alliances that needed maintaining, threats that needed crushing. He was gone from dawn until well past dark, leaving Kayla to navigate the fortress alone. When he did return, he was exhausted, the pain around his eyes more pronounced. He'd collapse into bed without speaking, and Kayla would lie beside him in the darkness, listening to his breathing gradually slow. They hadn't touched beyond that first handhold at the stream. The bond between them existed on paper, witnessed by tradition, but it felt fragile, temporary, like something that could shatter if either of them pressed too hard. On the 15th day, Merrin summoned her to the household offices, a cramped room buried in the lower levels of the keep, filled with ledgers and supply lists and the bitter smell of lamp oil. We have a problem, Merrin said without preamble. She gestured to the papers spread across her desk. Food stores are running low. The winter supplies should have lasted another month, but someone's been taking more than their share. Kayla looked at the numbers. She'd never been good at mathematics, but even she could see the discrepancy. How much is missing? Enough to feed 50 people for 2 weeks. Merrin's expression was cold. I've run this household for 12 years without incident. Then you arrive and suddenly we have theft. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? You think I'm stealing food? I think someone wants to make you look incompetent, or you are incompetent and this is the result. Merrin leaned back in her chair. Either way, it's your responsibility now. You're the queen. Handle it. She turned back to her ledgers, dismissing Kayla without another word. Kayla climbed back up to the main level, her mind racing. This was a test, another one, less obvious than the trial, but just as dangerous. If she failed to solve this, it would prove everyone right. The Ghost Queen, useless and out of her depth. But if she succeeded, maybe, just maybe, she could earn something other than contempt. She spent the rest of the day asking questions. The kitchen staff claimed they hadn't seen anything unusual. The guards who monitored the supply rooms swore no one had bypassed them. The officers suggested she was wasting everyone's time chasing shadows. By evening, Kayla was ready to scream. Every door she knocked on closed in her face. Every person she questioned looked at her like she was a child playing at authority. She found herself in the training yard as the sun set, watching soldiers run drills. Saren was among them, barking orders at a group of younger fighters. When she spotted Kayla, she called a break and walked over. My lady. The title still sounded strange coming from her. Can I help you with something? I'm trying to figure out who's been stealing from the food stores, Kayla said. Everyone keeps telling me it's impossible, but the numbers don't lie. Saren studied her for a moment. You think someone's testing you? I know someone's testing me. Smart. Saren gestured for Kayla to follow her to the edge of the yard, away from listening ears. Listen, most of the people here don't trust you. They think you're weak, that you'll break under pressure. But after the trial, some of us are reconsidering. Some of you? Not many, but enough. Saren lowered her voice. If you want to find your thief, stop asking questions and start watching. People lie with their mouths. Their actions tell the truth. Where do I start? The night shifts. That's when the fortress is quietest, when people think no one's paying attention. Saren glanced back at her trainees. And if you need backup, come find me. I owe you for that hit in the trial. Good strike, by the way. Hurt like hell. Kayla felt something unfamiliar, gratitude mixed with surprise. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You still have to catch them. That night, Kayla didn't go to bed. She wrapped herself in a dark cloak, pulled the hood up, and slipped out of her chambers when the hallways were empty. The fortress was different after dark, colder, more hostile. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and every sound echoed like a warning. She made her way to the storage level, where the food supplies were kept in locked rooms guarded by rotating shifts. She found a shadowed alcove with a clear view of the main supply room door and settled in to wait. Hours passed. Guards changed shifts. Servants hurried past on late errands. Nothing unusual. Kayla was starting to think she'd wasted her time when she heard footsteps, careful, deliberate, trying to be quiet. A figure emerged from a side corridor, cloaked and hooded like Kayla herself. The figure approached the supply room door, produced a key, and slipped inside. Kayla's heart hammered. She waited until the figure was fully inside, then crept forward. Through the partially open door, she could see them moving among the shelves, filling a bag with dried meat and grain. She pushed the door open wider. Found something interesting? The figure spun around and the hood fell back. It was Castor. For a moment they stared at each other. Then Castor's expression shifted from shock to cold calculation. Lady Kayla, he said smoothly, I was just conducting an inventory check. Very thorough of you to patrol the halls at this hour. With a bag full of stolen supplies? Kayla stepped into the room, letting the door close behind her. That's an interesting method of inventory. Castor's smile didn't waver. You misunderstand the situation. Do I? You're new here. You don't understand how things work. He set the bag down carefully. The fortress operates on certain arrangements. Resources are redistributed to maintain loyalty. It's how we've kept order for years. You mean you've been stealing from the stores and bribing people with the excess? Such an ugly word, stealing. I prefer to think of it as creative management. Castor moved closer, his voice dropping. And before you run to the king with this revelation, consider your position. You're already on thin ice. Accusing the chief advisor of theft? Without proof beyond your word against mine, that won't end well for you. Kayla held his gaze. You set this up. The missing supplies, the investigation. You wanted me to fail, to prove I couldn't handle even basic household management. Guilty. Castor's smile widened. Though I didn't expect you to actually catch me, color me impressed. But it doesn't change anything. You're still the girl with no scent, no power, no allies. I have the loyalty of half this fortress. Who do you think they'll believe? The king will believe me. Will he? Draven's been distracted lately, too much on his mind, and he already doubts whether bringing you here was a mistake. I've seen it in his face. One more scandal, one more sign that you're causing chaos instead of preventing it, and he'll cut his losses. Castor picked up his bag again. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to forget you saw me here. I'll make sure the supply discrepancies stop. Everyone wins, except the people you've been stealing from. Those people are soldiers. They follow strength. Right now I'm strong and you're not. That's just reality. Kayla felt anger burning in her chest. Not the hot, impulsive kind, but something colder, more focused. You're right about one thing, she said quietly. I don't have allies. I don't have power, but I'm not stupid, and I'm not going to let you turn me into your scapegoat. She pulled something from inside her cloak, a small device Saren had given her earlier, after their conversation. A recording crystal, the kind used by scouts to document territory observations. Castor's face went pale. You didn't. I did. Kayla held up the crystal, which glowed faintly in the dim light. Every word. Creative management, arrangements to maintain loyalty, the whole confession. Want to hear it played back? For the first time since she'd known him, Castor looked genuinely rattled. You can't prove when this was recorded. I'll say you faked it. Maybe. But Draven will listen to it, and he'll have questions. Questions you'll have to answer in front of the officers you've been bribing. Kayla stepped toward the door. So here's what's actually going to happen. You're going to return everything you took tonight. You're going to personally restore the missing supplies from your own resources. And you're going to stop undermining me, or this crystal goes straight to the king. Understand? Castor's jaw worked, rage and calculation fighting behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded once. Fine. Say it clearly. For the crystal. I understand, he bit out. Kayla left the room, her legs shaking but her expression calm. She didn't run, didn't look back. She walked through the corridors like she had every right to be there, like she wasn't terrified that Castor would follow her, like her entire gamble hadn't just depended on a piece of technology she barely understood. She made it back to her chambers, locked the door, and collapsed against it. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the crystal. She'd won. She thought she'd won. But she'd also just made an enemy of the second most powerful man in the fortress. The question was whether she'd survive what came next. The next morning, Kayla found Draven in his study, a sparse room dominated by maps and reports. He looked up as she entered, surprise crossing his features. You're up early. I need to tell you something. Kayla closed the door behind her and approached his desk. About Castor. She explained everything, the missing supplies, her investigation, the confrontation in the storage room. She played the recording crystal, watching Draven's expression darken with each passing second. When it finished, silence filled the room. Why didn't you come to me first? Draven asked finally. Because I needed to handle it myself. Kayla met his eyes. You said I had to prove I belonged here. That means solving my own problems. Even if it puts you in danger? Especially then. Draven stood and moved to the window, looking out over the fortress grounds. Castor's been with me for 6 years. He's ruthless, but I thought his loyalty was absolute. Maybe it was. Until I showed up and disrupted his control. You think this is about you? I think it's about power. Kayla moved to stand beside him. He sees me as a threat, not because I'm strong, but because I'm unpredictable. I don't fit into his schemes. Draven was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'll handle Castor. How? Publicly. I'll strip him of his position, exile him from the fortress, make it clear what happens when someone crosses my mate. That'll start a war within your own court. Maybe, but it'll also send a message. What if there's another way? Kayla turned to face him. What if instead of exiling him, we use him? Draven raised an eyebrow. Explain. Castor has influence. He's been bribing officers, building loyalty networks. If you exile him, those networks don't disappear. They just go underground, and we lose visibility on who's really loyal and who's not. Kayla's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. But if we keep him here, stripped of some power but not all of it, he becomes a known variable. We can watch him, see who he talks to, map out exactly who in this fortress can be bought. You want to use him as bait. I want to use him as a filter. Let him think he still has some influence, and watch who reaches for it. Draven studied her, something like approval in his eyes. That's devious. I learned from the best. My old pack was full of people playing political games. I just never had power enough to play before. Kayla hesitated. Will it work? It might. Draven moved back to his desk, pulling out a map of the fortress hierarchy. But it requires you to be more visible, more involved in court politics. Can you handle that? I survived Castor. I can handle politics. Politics is just combat with words instead of swords, and it's a lot bloodier. Then I'll bleed. Kayla's voice was steady. I'm not running from this, Draven. Not anymore. He looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, respect maybe, or the beginning of trust. All right, he said. We do it your way. But Castor's demotion needs to be public and harsh enough to be believable. He keeps his title as advisor but loses control over supply distribution and military logistics. Those responsibilities go to you. To me? You wanted to be involved. Congratulations. You just got a promotion. Draven's smile was sharp. Welcome to the real game, Kayla. The announcement came that afternoon in the Great Hall, with every officer and commander present. Draven stood at the raised platform, his voice carrying across the space with absolute authority. It has come to my attention that there have been irregularities in our supply management, he said. Resources have been misallocated, trust has been broken. As of today, Lord Castor is relieved of his duties overseeing supplies and logistics. The hall erupted in murmurs. Castor stood to the side, his face carefully neutral, but Kayla could see the rage in his eyes. These responsibilities will now fall to Queen Kayla, Draven continued. She has proven herself capable of uncovering problems others missed. Let's see if she can fix them. More murmurs. These ones less approving. Kayla felt every eye in the room on her, judging, doubting. Draven gestured for her to step forward. Kayla climbed the steps to the platform, her heart hammering but her expression calm. I know many of you question why I'm here, she said, and the hall fell silent. You think I'm weak, unworthy. A mistake the king made and will regret. Maybe you're right. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. So we can either make this work, or we can keep fighting each other while our enemies laugh at us. Your choice. She stepped back, and Draven dismissed the assembly. As people filed out, Kayla caught Castor's eye. He smiled at her, cold and promising violence. The game had begun. The next 3 weeks were brutal. Kayla threw herself into her new responsibilities with desperate focus, learning the supply chains, the logistics networks, the intricate web of resources that kept a fortress of 2,000 people functioning. She worked from dawn until midnight, often falling asleep at her desk surrounded by ledgers. The officers resented her oversight. The supply masters questioned every decision, and Castor watched from the shadows, waiting for her to fail. But slowly, things began to shift. Kayla found inefficiencies no one had bothered to address, routes that could be shortened, supplies that were being overordered, waste that could be eliminated. She implemented changes carefully, always explaining her reasoning, always listening to feedback even when it came wrapped in insults. And people started to notice. Saren became an unexpected ally, helping Kayla understand the military side of logistics. A young supply officer named Torrin admitted that Castor had been pressuring him to falsify reports and offered to testify if needed. Even Marin, grudgingly, acknowledged that the household was running more efficiently. But the more successful Kayla became, the more dangerous Castor grew. It started with small things, documents going missing from her office, meetings scheduled without her knowledge, rumors spreading through the fortress that she was overstepping her authority, that the king was having second thoughts. Then the accidents began. A loose stone on the staircase she used every morning. She caught herself just before falling, but her ankle twisted painfully. Spoiled meat in her dinner that left her violently ill for 2 days. A training session where the practice sword someone handed her had a chipped blade that sliced open her palm. Each incident could have been coincidence. Together they formed a pattern. Kayla said nothing to Draven. She'd chosen this path, and complaining about the consequences would make her look weak. Instead, she became more careful. She varied her routes through the fortress. She inspected her food before eating. She checked every weapon before training, but she couldn't avoid everything. One night, returning to her chambers after a late meeting, Kayla found her door unlocked. She pushed it open slowly, every sense on alert. The room looked normal at first. Then she noticed the smell, faint, acrid, wrong. She didn't step inside. Instead, she called for guards, her voice sharp enough to carry down the corridor. 2 soldiers appeared within seconds. "My lady, I need you to inspect my chambers. I think someone's been inside." The guards exchanged glances but obeyed. They entered the room carefully, and one of them immediately stumbled back, coughing. "Smoke powder," he gasped. "Someone rigged a trap. If you'd walked in and lit a candle, the whole room would have gone up." Kayla's blood went cold. This wasn't harassment. This was attempted murder. The guards secured the room, dismantling the trap and gathering evidence. Within an hour, Draven appeared, his expression thunderous. "Who did this?" he demanded. "I don't know," Kayla said, "but I have suspicions. Castor. Maybe. Or someone he paid. Does it matter?" Kayla met his eyes. "You exile him now, and whoever set this trap goes free. We need proof." "You could have died." "But I didn't." Her voice was steady, though her hands still shook. "I'm fine. We stick to the plan." Draven looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. "I'm assigning personal guards to you. 2, round the clock. No arguments." "Fine." "And you're moving into my chambers. I'm not leaving you alone where someone can get to you." Kayla started to protest, then stopped. He was right. And maybe, a small part of her admitted, she didn't want to be alone anymore. "All right," she said. They moved her belongings that night. Draven's chambers were larger than hers, more austere. Functional furniture, minimal decoration, everything designed for efficiency rather than comfort. But the bed was warmer when she climbed into it, and for the first time since arriving at the fortress, Kayla felt something like safety. Draven lay beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body, but not touching. "I'm sorry," he said into the darkness. "For what?" "For putting you in this position. I thought giving you responsibility would help you find your place here. Instead, I made you a target. You gave me a chance to matter. That's more than anyone else ever did." Kayla turned onto her side to face him. "And I'm not giving up now. We're too close." "Close to what?" "To finding out who Castor's working with. Someone gave him that key to the supply room, a key that only officers have access to. Someone built that trap in my chambers, a trap that requires knowledge of explosives. He's not working alone." Draven's eyes glinted in the dim light. "You think there's a conspiracy?" "I think there's a group of people who want the old order back. Before you took control. Before you unified the territories." Kayla's mind was racing now, connections forming. What if this isn't about me at all? What if I'm just the excuse they need to destabilize your rule? Draven was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "If you're right, this goes deeper than Castor. It means I have traitors in my inner circle." "Yes." "Then we need to draw them out, make them think they're winning." "How?" Draven smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. "We give them what they want. A weak queen they can manipulate. A distracted king they can undermine. We make them think they've already won. And then? Then we cut the head off the snake and burn the rest." The plan was simple, but dangerous. Kayla would continue her work, but she'd start making mistakes. Small ones at first, then larger. She'd appear overwhelmed, uncertain, cracking under pressure. It would draw out anyone who wanted to exploit her weakness. Meanwhile, Draven would seem increasingly frustrated with her, creating visible tension between them. It would give the conspirators confidence, make them believe their strategy was working, but it meant Kayla had to fail publicly, had to endure mockery and scorn and prove every doubt anyone had ever had about her. "Are you sure you can do this?" Draven asked. "Once we start, there's no going back." Kayla thought about the girl she'd been at the choosing, invisible, forgotten, resigned to death in the wastelands. Then she thought about who she'd become, someone who'd won a combat trial, caught a thief, survived an assassination attempt. "I can do it," she said. "I've spent my whole life pretending to be nothing. This is just one more performance." They started the next day. Kayla accidentally approved a shipment of grain to the wrong garrison, causing a minor supply crisis. She snapped at officers during meetings, showing strain. She and Draven had a loud argument in the Great Hall about resource allocation, staged perfectly to look real. The fortress ate it up. Within days, the rumors were everywhere. The queen was incompetent, the king regretted his choice, the bond was fracturing. And Castor smiled. 2 weeks into the plan, he approached Kayla privately in the library, where she sat surrounded by ledgers, playing the part of someone drowning in responsibility. "You look tired, my lady," he said, his voice oily with false concern. "I'm fine. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone in over her head." He sat down across from her, uninvited. "This position isn't for everyone. There's no shame in admitting you're not suited for it." "What do you want, Castor?" "To help. Believe it or not, I don't enjoy watching you struggle. We got off on the wrong foot, but That doesn't mean we can't find common ground. Kayla looked up at him, letting exhaustion show on her face. What kind of common ground? The king is distracted lately, pulled in too many directions. He doesn't have time to manage every detail of the fortress anymore. That's why he gave you these responsibilities, to ease his burden. But you're not trained for this. You don't have the background, the knowledge. Castor leaned forward. But I do. Let me help you. We can work together, make sure things run smoothly. All you have to do is trust me. It was bait. Obvious, clumsy bait, but that was the point. Castor thought she was desperate enough to take it. Why would you help me? Kayla asked. I got you demoted. You exposed a problem I should have caught myself. I was angry, yes, but I'm not petty. The fortress is bigger than personal grudges. He smiled. Besides, if you fail, it reflects badly on all of us. Better to shore you up than watch you collapse. Kayla pretended to consider it. What would this help look like? Small things at first. I review your decisions before they're implemented, catch any mistakes. Eventually, we can divide responsibilities more officially. You handle the household matters, I handle logistics and military supply. Play to our respective strengths, which would give him back everything he'd lost, Kayla thought, and put her back in a ceremonial role with no real power. I need to think about it, she said. Of course. Take your time. Castor stood. But don't take too long. The king's patience isn't infinite. He left, and Kayla sat alone in the library, her heart pounding. The trap was set. That night, she reported everything to Draven. He listened carefully, then nodded. He's testing you. If you accept his help, he'll know you're desperate. That's when he'll push harder. Bring in whoever else is part of this. So I accept, Kayla said. Not immediately. Make him work for it. Show reluctance, then gradually give in. It has to look real. Over the next week, Kayla let Castor slowly worm his way back into her operations. She asked for his advice, took his suggestions, allowed him to review her work, and slowly, others began appearing. Officers she didn't know well, advisors who'd kept their distance before. They were all so helpful, so eager to assist the struggling queen. Kayla smiled and thanked them and memorized every face. On the 23rd day, Commander Thorne requested a private meeting with Draven. Kayla wasn't invited, but Draven insisted she attend, claiming she needed to be involved in all major decisions now. Thorne didn't look happy about it, but he didn't argue. They met in Draven's study, Draven behind his desk, Kayla standing slightly to the side, Thorne in the chair across from them. Your Majesty, Thorne began, his voice carefully neutral. I need to discuss a sensitive matter. Speak freely. Thorne glanced at Kayla, then back to Draven. It's about the Queen's management of resources. There have been concerns. What kind of concerns? Mistakes, inefficiencies, decisions that don't make tactical sense. Thorne pulled out a report. 3 shipments redirected incorrectly in the past 2 weeks. A garrison left undersupplied before a patrol into hostile territory. Waste that's increasing, not decreasing. Draven's expression was carefully blank. And you're bringing this to me because the officers are losing faith. They're wondering if perhaps the Queen's responsibilities should be reconsidered. Reconsidered how? Reduced or eliminated? Thorne met Draven's eyes. You made a bold choice at the choosing, Your Majesty, but bold doesn't always mean right. Maybe it's time to admit this isn't working. Kayla felt the words like physical blows. Even knowing this was part of the plan, even knowing Thorne was revealing himself as part of the conspiracy, it hurt to hear. Draven stood slowly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Let me make something very clear, Commander. Kayla is my mate and your queen. If you have concerns about her performance, you bring them to her directly. You don't go behind her back to undermine her authority. Understood? Thorne's jaw tightened. With respect, Your Majesty. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty. Good. Now get out. Thorne left, his face flushed with anger. The moment the door closed, Draven turned to Kayla. That's 3 officers in Castor. Probably more we haven't identified yet. Thorne's been with you for years, Kayla said quietly, which makes his betrayal worse. Draven's expression was hard, but it also means this conspiracy has deep roots. We need to move soon before they decide to act. Act how? A coup, an assassination, something dramatic enough to reset the power structure. He looked at her. They'll go after you first. You're the weaker target. Then let them try, Kayla said. We set up a trap of our own. Draw them out into the open where we can deal with all of them at once. You're talking about using yourself as bait. I'm talking about ending this. I'm tired of playing weak, Draven. I want my life back. He studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right, but we do this carefully. One mistake and you're dead. Then we won't make mistakes. They spent the next 2 days planning. The trap would be sprung at the next full council meeting when all the officers and advisors would be present. Kayla would present a proposal so flawed, so obviously disastrous, that it would force the conspirators to act. And when they did, Draven's loyal guards, the ones they'd quietly identified and briefed, would be waiting. The night before the meeting, Kayla couldn't sleep. She lay in bed beside Draven, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in her mind. What if it doesn't work? She asked into the darkness. Then we improvise. That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be. Draven rolled onto his side to face her. But you need to trust yourself. You've come further than anyone expected. Don't doubt that now. I don't doubt me. I doubt them. What if we missed someone? What if there are more conspirators than we think? Then we deal with it, together. He reached out and took her hand. You're not alone in this, Kayla. You haven't been since the choosing. His hand was warm, solid, real. Kayla gripped it tightly, drawing strength from the contact. When this is over, she said, assuming we survive, what then? Then we rebuild, create something better than what came before. A fortress where people don't plot against their queen. That would be a start. Kayla almost smiled. Almost. The council meeting convened at noon in the Great Hall. Every officer, every advisor, every person of rank in the fortress was present. The room hummed with tension. Everyone could feel that something was building. Draven sat on his throne, his expression unreadable. Kayla stood at a podium to his right, the proposal in front of her. I've been reviewing our supply chains, she began, her voice steady, and I've identified a way to increase efficiency by 40%. The room perked up. 40% was massive. We consolidate all food storage into a single warehouse, Kayla continued. Currently, we have supplies spread across 3 locations, which requires multiple guard rotations and creates waste from duplication. If we centralize everything, we can reduce overhead and improve distribution. Murmurs spread through the crowd. It sounded reasonable, on the surface, but anyone with tactical training would see the flaw immediately. Castor stood. My lady, while I appreciate the ambition, I have concerns. A single warehouse creates a vulnerability. If that location is compromised, we lose everything. I've accounted for that, Kayla said. We increase guard presence. By how much? Triple the current rotation. That pulls soldiers from other duties, patrols, perimeter defense. Those can be adjusted. Commander Thorne rose now, his expression grave. Your Majesty, I must object. This proposal would weaken our defensive posture significantly. In the event of an attack, we'd be spread too thin to respond effectively. The Queen has made her recommendation, Draven said coldly. I see no reason to dismiss it out of hand. Your Majesty, unless you're suggesting my mate doesn't know what she's doing. The room fell silent. This was the moment, the line they'd drawn to force a choice. Thorne's face flushed. I'm suggesting that perhaps the Queen's inexperience is showing. This plan is dangerous, and implementing it could cost lives. Then what do you propose, Commander? I propose we return logistics management to someone with actual military training. Lord Castor, for instance. There it was, the move they'd been waiting for. Kayla saw it happen in slow motion, Castor's expression shifting from false concern to cold calculation. Thorne stepping forward, his hand moving toward his belt where a knife was hidden. Other officers rising from their seats, their intention suddenly clear. This wasn't going to be a political coup. This was going to be violence. Draven's guards moved first, stepping out from their positions along the walls. But the conspirators were ready. They'd brought their own people, disguised as servants and attendants. Chaos erupted. Kayla dove behind the podium as a knife whistled past her head. Steel rang against steel as guards clashed with traitors. Shouting filled the hall, orders and curses mixing into noise. Draven was on his feet, his own sword drawn, cutting down the first person who charged the platform. His movements were brutal, efficient, nothing like the careful control Kayla had seen in training. This was a man who'd built his reputation on violence, and he wore it like armor. Castor was backing toward the side exit, using the chaos as cover. Kayla saw him going and made a split-second decision. She couldn't let him escape. She grabbed a fallen knife from the floor and ran after him, ignoring the battle around her. Castor glanced back, saw her coming, and his eyes widened with genuine surprise. "You?" He laughed, harsh and disbelieving. "You're gonna stop me?" "Yes," Kayla said. She'd never killed anyone, had never even seriously hurt someone before the trial with Saren. But as Castor drew his own blade and turned to face her, Kayla felt something cold settle into her chest. He'd tried to kill her, repeatedly, and he'd betrayed Draven, who'd shown her more kindness than anyone in her life. Some things, she realized, were worth fighting for. Castor moved first, fast and skilled, his blade aimed at her throat. Kayla blocked, barely, and felt the impact jar through her arms. He was stronger than her, better trained, but she was angrier. She pressed forward, using the techniques Draven had drilled into her during those midnight training sessions. Don't retreat. Use momentum. Fight dirty. When Castor overextended on a thrust, Kayla didn't try to block. She dodged to the side and slammed her knife into his shoulder. He screamed and stumbled back, blood pouring from the wound. His sword clattered to the floor. Kayla kicked it away and pressed the knife to his throat. "Yield." "You won't kill me," Castor gasped. "You don't have it in you." "You're right," Kayla said. "I won't kill you, but I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you tried to do here." Behind them, the fighting was dying down. Draven's guards had overwhelmed the conspirators, and bodies littered the floor. The survivors were being restrained, Thorn among them. Draven appeared at Kayla's side, his blade still drawn and dripping red. He looked at Castor, then at Kayla. "You caught him." "I caught him." "Good." Draven's voice was ice. "Take him to the cells. We'll deal with all of them together." Guards hauled Castor away, and finally, Kayla let herself breathe. Her hands were shaking, adrenaline and terror mixing into something that felt like hysteria. "It's over," Draven said quietly. "Is it?" "The conspiracy is broken. The traitors are identified. It's over." Kayla looked around the great hall, at the blood on the floor, the bodies being carried out, the shocked faces of those who'd remained loyal. This was victory, but it tasted like ash. "No," she said. "This is just the beginning." Because now came the hard part, rebuilding trust, proving that the fortress could function without fear and betrayal as its foundation. And Kayla had no idea if she was strong enough for that. But she was going to try. The trials began 3 days after the coup attempt, and Kayla insisted on being present for every single one. Draven had wanted to handle it privately, quick executions in the courtyard, bodies burned, evidence of the conspiracy erased like it had never happened. That was how he'd always dealt with betrayal before. Clean, final. No loose ends. But Kayla refused. "If we do this in secret, the fortress will never trust us," she'd argued in his chambers the night after the battle. "They'll whisper that we murdered anyone who questioned us, that we're tyrants who crushed dissent." "We are tyrants," Draven had said flatly. "That's the job." "No, you're a king who's held together fractured territories through strength. But strength without justice is just brutality." Kayla had met his eyes, refusing to back down. "These people need to see that what happened wasn't about protecting my pride or your authority. It was about stopping a conspiracy that would have destroyed everything you built. They need to see the evidence, hear the confessions, understand why this happened." Draven had stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then he'd said, "You're asking me to turn this into a spectacle." "I'm asking you to turn it into accountability." So the trials were public, held in the great hall where everyone could watch. Castor went first, his shoulder bandaged, but his eyes still defiant as guards dragged him before the throne. The hall was packed. Every soldier, servant, and officer who could squeeze inside had come to witness. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. Draven sat on his throne, Kayla standing at his right. She'd chosen her clothing carefully that morning, dark leather, practical boots, her hair pulled back severely. No jewelry, no softness. She looked like someone who'd survived a battle, because she had. Lord Castor, Draven's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. You stand accused of conspiracy to commit treason, theft from fortress stores, and attempted murder of the queen. How do you answer these charges? Castor lifted his chin. I answer that I served this fortress faithfully for 6 years while you were busy conquering territories and ignoring what was happening in your own home. Everything I did was to preserve order in the face of chaos you invited in. He gestured toward Kayla, his mouth twisting with contempt. You bound yourself to a woman with no scent, no power, no ability to lead. You gave her responsibilities she couldn't handle and expected us all to pretend it wasn't a disaster. I didn't betray you, Your Majesty. You betrayed us when you put your own desires above the good of your people. The crowd stirred. Some faces showed agreement, others looked uncertain. Kayla stepped forward before Draven could respond. You're right about one thing. I had no idea what I was doing when I first arrived here. Castor's expression flickered with surprise that she was speaking at all. I didn't know how to manage supplies or deal with officers or navigate court politics, Kayla continued, her voice steady. And you saw that as weakness, as an opportunity. You tried to sabotage me from the beginning, not because I was actually failing, but because you were terrified I might succeed. Terrified? Castor laughed. Of you? Of what I represented. Change. A different way of doing things. A queen who didn't come from the old power structures you'd spent years building influence within. Kayla turned to address the crowd. Castor didn't steal supplies because the fortress needed them. He stole them to create artificial problems he could solve, to make himself indispensable. He didn't try to kill me because I was incompetent. He tried to kill me because I was exposing his schemes. She pulled out the recording crystal from her belt and held it up. This contains his confession, his own words admitting to theft, bribery, and manipulation. Would you like to hear it? That was obtained through deception, Castor snarled. It's not legitimate evidence. It's his voice, Kayla said calmly. His admission. His truth. The only deception was his, not mine. Draven gestured to a court scribe, who took the crystal and activated it. Castor's voice filled the hall, smug and confident, explaining his creative management and arrangements to maintain loyalty. The crowd's mood shifted. She could see it in their faces, doubt giving way to disgust. When the recording finished, Draven spoke. Lord Castor, you claim you acted in the fortress's best interests, but the evidence shows you acted in your own interests, at the fortress's expense. That is the definition of treason. Then execute me, Castor spat. Prove you're exactly the tyrant everyone already knows you are. No, Kayla said quietly. Exile. The hall went silent. Even Draven looked at her in surprise. Exile? Castor's laugh was bitter. You're showing me mercy? I'm showing you justice. Death would be quick. Exile means you live with what you've done, stripped of power, cut off from everything you built here. You'll spend the rest of your life knowing you lost to the woman you tried to destroy. Kayla turned to Draven. That's my recommendation. The decision is yours. Draven studied her face, then nodded slowly. Exile. You have until sunset to leave fortress grounds. If you're found within our territories after that, the sentence becomes death. Guards hauled Castor away. He was shouting something, but his words were lost in the crowd's noise. Some people looked satisfied. Others looked disappointed they hadn't gotten their execution. But they'd seen justice done according to law, not impulse. That mattered. The other conspirators followed. Commander Thorne, 2 supply officers, 4 soldiers who'd participated in the attack. Each trial followed the same pattern. Evidence presented, confessions played, sentences delivered. Some were exiled like Castor. Others, who'd actually drawn blood during the coup attempt, faced execution. Kayla watched it all, forcing herself not to look away. This was the cost of power, watching people die because of decisions she'd helped make. It made her sick, but she refused to let that show. The fortress needed to see strength, not squeamishness. By the time the last trial ended, the sun was setting. The great hall had emptied except for Draven, Kayla, and a handful of guards cleaning blood from the floor. Kayla's legs felt like water. She'd been standing for 6 hours straight, and every muscle in her body ached. "It's done," Draven said quietly. "Is it?" Kayla looked at the empty space where the accused had stood. "We cut out the conspiracy, but we didn't fix what made it possible. People still don't trust me. They just fear you enough to stay quiet now." "Fear is a type of trust." "No, it's not. Fear is compliance. Trust is something else entirely." Draven moved to stand beside her, looking out over the hall. "What do you want, Kayla? Applause? Gratitude? These people will never love you." "I don't need love. I need them to see me as something other than your mistake." "Then show them. The trials were a start, but they're just words. Actions are what matter." "What kind of actions?" "The kind that prove you're not just here to hold a title. The kind that change things." Draven turned to face her. "You wanted responsibility. You have it now. The question is what you're going to do with it." Kayla thought about that long into the night, lying in bed beside Draven while he slept. She'd survived the conspiracy, won the trials, proven she wasn't completely useless. But surviving wasn't the same as succeeding. If she wanted the fortress to accept her, really accept her, not just tolerate her, she needed to give them something no one else could. The problem was, she had no idea what that looked like. The answer came from an unexpected source 2 weeks later. Saren found Kayla in the training yard where she'd been practicing sword forms until her arms burned. "You're getting better," Saren observed, leaning against the fence. "Still telegraphing your strikes, but better." "Thanks, I think." Kayla lowered her practice sword. "Did you need something?" "Actually, yes. I have a problem, and you're the only one who might be able to help." Kayla raised an eyebrow. "Me? Don't sound so surprised. You caught Castor when the rest of us didn't even suspect him. Maybe you can solve this too." Saren gestured for Kayla to follow her to the edge of the yard, away from listening ears. "The Eastern Garrison has been reporting unusual activity near the border. Tracks, signs of campsites, but no direct contact. My scouts can't figure out if it's bandits, refugees, or something worse." "And you're telling me this because?" "Because the king's ready to send a full military response, and I think that's the wrong move. If it's just refugees fleeing the wastelands, we'll be slaughtering innocents. But if I'm wrong, and it's a hostile force, waiting could cost lives." Saren met Kayla's eyes. "You think differently than the rest of us. You don't rely on the same instincts. Maybe you'll see something we're missing." Kayla felt a flicker of something, not quite hope, but close. "You want me to investigate?" "I want you to look at the reports and tell me what you think. No pressure, no expectations, just a different perspective." It was such a small thing, just reviewing some scouting reports, but it felt like something more, like a test Kayla had actually been invited to take rather than one she'd had forced on her. "Show me what you have," Kayla said. They spent the next 3 hours in Saren's office, spreading maps and reports across a table that looked like it had survived several wars. The information was scattered, incomplete. Sightings here, tracks there, a cold campfire, signs of foraging. "Your scouts are looking for patterns that make sense to them," Kayla said slowly, studying the map. "Movement patterns, hunting routes, territorial markers. But these tracks don't follow any of those patterns." "Exactly, which is why we can't tell what we're dealing with." Kayla traced her finger across the map, connecting the sighting locations. "What if you're looking at it wrong? What if these aren't movement patterns at all?" "What do you mean?" "These sites aren't camps where people stop to rest. They're too exposed, too vulnerable. But they're all near water sources and game trails." Kayla looked up at Saren. "I think these are teaching sites." "Teaching sites?" "Someone's training others how to survive in the wilderness, how to find water, track game, build shelter. That's why the patterns don't make sense. They're not trying to get somewhere. They're learning to live out there." Saren stared at the map, then at Kayla. "Why would anyone do that?" "Because they're preparing for exile, or because they've already been exiled and they're trying to survive." Kayla felt pieces clicking together. "After Castor and the others were banished, where did they go?" "Into the wastelands, standard procedure." And how many people has this fortress exiled in the past 5 years?" Saren's expression darkened. "Dozens, maybe more." So there could be a whole community out there, people who were cast out, learning to survive, maybe planning to come back. Kayla met Saren's eyes. That's your unusual activity, not bandits or refugees, exiles. Saren swore. If that's true, we have a serious problem. An organized group of exiles with a grudge against the fortress could be a threat or could be an opportunity. How is that an opportunity? Because right now, exile is a death sentence. We send people into the wastelands and assume they'll die. But if they're not dying, if they're surviving, organizing, then maybe we need to rethink what exile means. Kayla's mind was racing now. What if instead of treating exile as execution, we treated it as resettlement? You want to help the people we banish? I want to stop creating enemies when we don't have to. Not everyone we exile deserves death. Some of them just made mistakes or challenged the wrong person. If we gave them tools, resources, a chance at survival, they'd have no reason to attack us. They might even become allies. Saren looked skeptical. The king will never agree to that. Let me talk to him. Kayla found Draven in his study that evening, surrounded by reports from various territories. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. I need to talk to you about the eastern border situation, Kayla said. Draven glanced up. Saren already briefed me. I'm sending a patrol to investigate. Don't. Not yet. Kayla moved to his desk and spread out the map she'd brought. I think I know what's happening out there. She explained her theory, the teaching sites, the organized exiles, the potential threat that was really an opportunity. Draven listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each word. When she finished, he said, You want me to help people I exiled. I want you to stop creating enemies you don't need. They were exiled for a reason. Some of them were exiled for stealing food to feed their families, or for questioning orders, or for being related to someone who committed a crime. Kayla leaned on the desk. Not all of them were caster. And even if they were, exile is supposed to be punishment, not execution. If we're sending people out there to die, we should be honest about it. This fortress has always handled exile this way. And how's that working out? You have a group of organized survivors at your border, possibly armed, definitely angry. That's what happens when you treat exile like execution. You create desperate people with nothing to lose. Draven was silent for a long moment. Then he said, What exactly are you proposing? A settlement program. We identify a location near the border, far enough that exiles can't easily return, close enough that we can monitor them. We provide basic supplies, tools, seeds. Not luxury, just survival. In exchange, they agree to stay peaceful, to not attack our territories. They'll see it as weakness. They'll see it as pragmatism. And the fortress will see it as smart leadership. Kayla met his eyes. You've spent years building your reputation on strength. But strength isn't just about crushing threats. It's about preventing them from forming in the first place. This is a risk. So was choosing me. But you did it anyway. Draven smiled slightly at that. You're using my own logic against me. I learned from the best. He studied the map again, tracing the locations she'd marked. If I agree to this, you'll need to oversee it. Find the location, establish the settlement, negotiate with the exiles. It'll be dangerous. I know. They might kill you on sight. They might, but they also might listen. I'm the queen who survived a coup and gave mercy to traitors. That has to count for something. Draven looked at her for a long moment, something complex moving behind his eyes. You've changed since you arrived here. I had to. The girl who stood at the end of that line wouldn't have survived this place. I'm not sure I'm happy about that. Why not? Because that girl was quiet, peaceful. And now I'm married to someone who wants to negotiate with exiles and reform our justice system. But he was smiling as he said it. Fine. You have my approval, but you take guards, real ones, not just ceremonial escorts. And if this goes wrong, we fall back to the original plan and clear the border by force. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might regret this when you're out there actually trying to convince angry exiles that we mean them no harm. Kayla thought he might be right, but she didn't say so. Instead, she spent the next week preparing. She studied maps of the border region, consulted with scouts about suitable locations, and gathered supplies, enough to establish a basic settlement without depleting fortress stores. Saren agreed to lead the military escort, bringing 10 of her best soldiers. They'd travel light, move fast, and hopefully avoid any conflicts before Kayla could attempt diplomacy. The night before they left, Draven pulled her aside in their chambers. "I'm coming with you," he said. Kayla turned from packing her travel bag. "What? No. You're riding into potentially hostile territory to negotiate with people who have every reason to hate us. I'm not letting you do that alone." "I won't be alone. I have Saren and 10 soldiers." "Not enough. Draven, if you come, it changes everything. They'll see this as a military operation, not a diplomatic one. They'll think you're there to intimidate them, not help them. Maybe they should be intimidated. That defeats the entire purpose." Kayla moved closer, lowering her voice. "This only works if I go as someone they might actually trust. Not the terrifying warlord king, but the queen who gave mercy to traitors. Someone who understands what it's like to be cast out." Draven's jaw tightened. "I don't like it. I know, but this is important. If I'm going to be queen of this fortress, I need to do it my way. And my way means taking risks you wouldn't take. Your way might get you killed. Then I'll die doing something that matters. That's more than I ever expected to have." He looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her into an embrace, the first real physical affection he'd shown since the choosing. Kayla stiffened in surprise, then slowly relaxed against him. "Come back," he said quietly. "That's an order." "Yes, Your Majesty." They left at dawn, riding east toward the border. The land grew rougher as they traveled, forests giving way to rocky hills and sparse vegetation. By the third day, they'd reached the region where the sightings had been reported. Saren called a halt near a stream. "We're close. Scout reports put the main teaching site about 2 miles north. If we approach carefully, we can assess the situation before making contact." "Or we could just walk in openly," Kayla said. "Show we're not trying to hide anything. That's a good way to get arrows in our backs. It's also the only way to build trust. If we sneak around, they'll assume we're planning an attack." Saren looked like she wanted to argue, but finally nodded. "Your call. But at the first sign of hostility, we retreat. Clear?" "Clear." They rode north slowly, making no attempt to hide their approach. Kayla's heart hammered with each step, but she kept her expression calm, her posture non-threatening. The teaching site appeared suddenly, a clearing where several people were gathered around a fire. They looked up as the horses approached, and Kayla saw fear flash across their faces before it hardened into defiance. There were about 15 of them, ranging from teenagers to people in their 50s. Their clothing was worn but functional, their faces weathered. These were survivors, people who'd learned to live in a place designed to kill them. One of them stood, a woman in her 40s with gray-streaked hair and a knife at her belt. "That's far enough. State your business." Kayla dismounted slowly, keeping her hands visible. "My name is Kayla. I'm queen of Shadowhold Fortress. I came to talk." The woman's laugh was harsh. "The fortress queen wants to talk to the people she cast out? That's rich. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm not here to threaten you or drag you back. I'm here to offer an alternative." "Alternative to what? Living like animals while you feast in your stone fortress?" "Alternative to exile meaning death." Kayla took a careful step forward. "The fortress has always treated exile as execution. Send people into the wastelands and forget about them. But you didn't die. You survived. You built something out here, and that makes me think we've been doing this wrong." Another person spoke up. A young man, maybe 25. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about changing how exile works. Giving people tools and supplies, establishing a settlement where you can actually build lives instead of just struggling to survive day to day. In exchange, you agree to stay peaceful, to not attack our territories." The woman's expression was suspicious. "Why would you do that?" "Because creating enemies is expensive and dangerous. Because not everyone we exile deserves to die. Because it's the right thing to do." Kayla met her eyes. "And because I know what it's like to be cast out. I stood at the end of a line where everyone said I didn't belong. The only difference between me and you is that someone gave me a chance." Silence fell over the clearing. The exiles exchanged glances, uncertainty replacing hostility. "You expect us to believe the fortress suddenly developed a conscience?" the woman said finally. I expect you to believe that things can change. They have to, or we'll all end up dead. You from starvation, us from fighting wars we don't need. Kayla gestured to the clearing. This place you've built is impressive, but it's not sustainable. Winter's coming, and you don't have enough stores. You're training people to survive, but survival isn't the same as living. I'm offering you the chance to actually live. The young man stepped forward. And if we refuse? Then you refuse. I'm not here to force anything, but I hope you'll at least consider it. The woman studied Kayla for a long moment. You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. That got a small smile. What's your name again? Kayla. Kayla Vire. I'm Thera. Used to be a supply officer at the fortress until I questioned how Lord Castor was managing resources. Guess that makes me a traitor. Her tone was bitter. Castor was exiled 2 weeks ago for theft, conspiracy, and attempted murder. You were right to question him. Thera's eyes widened. He was exiled? He was, along with several others who abused their power. The fortress is cleaning house. Part of that means reconsidering how we treat people like you. Another person spoke up, an older man with a scarred face. Even if we believe you, how do we know this isn't a trap? You could be planning to round us all up once we're settled somewhere. You don't know. You have to take it on faith, same as I'm taking on faith that you won't kill me the moment I turn my back. Kayla's voice softened. I know that's asking a lot, but someone has to take the first step, or we'll all stay stuck in this cycle forever. The exiles talked among themselves in low voices. Kayla stood perfectly still, trying not to let her nervousness show. Saren and the soldiers waited behind her, hands near their weapons but not drawn. Finally, Thera turned back. We'll need time to discuss this among ourselves. There are others out here, people who were exiled before we were, who might not be as willing to trust. Take all the time you need. I'll be camped by the stream for the next 3 days. If you decide you want to talk more, you know where to find me. And if we decide to attack instead, then my guards will defend me. But I hope it doesn't come to that. Thera nodded slowly. 3 days. We'll give you an answer then. Kayla returned to her horse and rode back to the stream with Serene and the soldiers. When they were out of earshot, Saren exhaled sharply. That went better than I expected. Thought we'd be running for our lives. We might still be, Kayla said, but at least we have a chance now. They made camp by the stream and waited. The first day passed in tense silence. The second day brought a visitor, a teenager who approached warily and asked detailed questions about the settlement proposal. Kayla answered everything honestly, and the teenager left without committing to anything. On the third day, just as the sun was setting, Thera appeared with a group of about 20 exiles. We've discussed your offer, she said without preamble, and we have conditions. I'm listening. First, the settlement needs to be far enough from the fortress that we don't feel like we're being watched constantly. Second, we want autonomy. We'll govern ourselves, follow our own rules. Third, we want access to trade, not charity. We'll produce goods. You provide market access. Kayla considered. Those are reasonable conditions. I'll need to discuss the trade access with the king, but I don't see why he'd refuse. One more thing. Anyone from the fortress who was exiled unjustly, like I was, should have the option to return if they want. Not mandatory, just an option. That was trickier. I can propose it, but no promises. Some people were exiled for legitimate reasons, and bringing them back could cause problems. Then make it a case-by-case review. We provide testimony, you decide based on evidence. Thera's expression was hard. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. Kayla held out her hand. Deal. We'll establish the settlement, set up trade routes, and review cases for possible return. In exchange, you agree to remain peaceful and respect fortress boundaries. Thera looked at Kayla's hand for a moment, then took it. Deal. Relief flooded through Kayla so powerfully she almost stumbled. She'd done it. Actually done it. The ride back to the fortress took 3 days, and when they arrived, word had already spread. Kayla had negotiated a settlement with exiles, something no one had thought possible. Draven met her in the courtyard, his expression unreadable. I hear you made promises on my behalf. I made proposals. The final decisions are yours. Trade access for exiles? They're offering to produce goods we need. Seems wasteful to refuse just out of pride. Draven studied her face, then smiled slightly. You're getting good at this. At what? Being queen. Actually leading, not just surviving. Kayla felt warmth spread through her chest. Does that mean you approve? It means I'm impressed, and yes, I approve. We'll establish the settlement, set up trade routes, and review exile cases. Your way. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. You took a risk out there. It paid off. Don't make me regret letting you do that. I'll try not to. The next weeks were a blur of activity. Kayla worked with Saren and a team of engineers to identify a settlement location, far enough from the fortress for independence, close enough for trade. They transported supplies, established basic infrastructure, and negotiated terms with the growing exile community. Word spread beyond the border region. Exiles from other territories began appearing, drawn by rumors of a place where they could live rather than just survive. Not all of them were trustworthy, and there were incidents, theft, fights, one attempted attack on a supply convoy. But Kayla worked with Thera to establish rules, and gradually, the settlement began to take shape. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to perfect. But it was something new, a middle ground between execution and mercy, between isolation and integration. And slowly, the fortress began to see it too. Officers who dismissed Kayla as the king's mistake started acknowledging her in corridors. Servants stopped checking with Marin before following her orders. Soldiers training in the yards nodded respect when she passed. 6 weeks after the settlement was established, Saren found Kayla reviewing supply reports in her office. You have visitors, Saren said. Who? Better if you see for yourself. Kayla followed her to the courtyard where a group of about 30 people waited. They looked weathered, travel-worn, but their expressions were determined. Thera stepped forward. Queen Kayla, we brought the first shipment of goods from the settlement, furs, dried meat, medicinal herbs, like we agreed. Kayla stared at the goods laid out on the ground. This is more than I expected. We've been busy. Turns out people work harder when they're building something that's theirs rather than just surviving someone else's punishment. Thera smiled slightly. We also brought something else. A request, actually. What kind of request? Some of the people at the settlement want to learn. Reading, writing, basic medicine. We have knowledge, but we're limited. We were hoping the fortress might be willing to send a teacher. Just once a week, nothing more. It was such a simple request, but Kayla understood what it really meant. It meant the exiles trusted them enough to let fortress people into their community. It meant the relationship was evolving beyond simple trade into something more. I'll arrange it, Kayla said. One teacher, once a week. We'll start with basics and see where it goes. Thera nodded. Thank you. For this? For everything. You gave us something I didn't think we'd ever have again. What's that? Hope. After Thera and her group left, Kayla stood in the courtyard watching them go. She felt exhausted, uncertain, and more accomplished than she'd ever felt in her life. You did well, Draven said, appearing beside her. We did well. This only worked because you supported it. I supported it because you convinced me it was worth the risk. He looked at her, something warm in his dark eyes. 6 weeks ago, you were the girl no one would choose. Now you're the queen who changed how we treat our enemies. That's not nothing. It feels like nothing compared to what still needs fixing. That's because you're starting to understand what ruling actually means. It's not big moments of glory. It's small changes that compound over time until suddenly everything's different. Draven took her hand, a casual gesture that still felt significant. You're finding your place here, Kayla. Finally. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him. I think you might be right. Of course I'm right. I'm the king. Kayla laughed. Actually laughed, free and genuine, modest as ever. Modesty is for people who haven't earned arrogance. They stood together in the courtyard as the sun set, and for the first time since the choosing, Kayla felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because someone had placed her there, but because she'd fought for it. The fortress still had problems. The territories still had conflicts, and there would be more challenges ahead. She knew that with absolute certainty. But she'd proven something important. both to the fortress and to herself. She wasn't just the king's choice anymore. She was a queen in her own right, and that made all the difference. Winter came early that year, bringing storms that buried the fortress under 3 feet of snow and turned the mountain passes into frozen death traps. The kind of winter that tested everything: supplies, morale, the strength of walls, and the resolve of the people sheltering behind them. Kayla spent the first week of the storms walking the fortress corridors, checking on families huddled in their quarters, ensuring the kitchens had enough fuel, that the sick hall had medicine, that no one was forgotten in the chaos. It was exhausting work that left her falling into bed each night too tired to think, but it was also the work that finally broke through the last walls of resistance. On the 8th day of storms, old Marin, the widow who'd stood behind Kayla in that terrible line at the choosing, appeared at her office door with a basket of bread. "Thought you might be hungry," Marin said gruffly. "You've been running yourself ragged." Kayla looked up from the supply ledgers, surprised. "Thank you. That's kind. It's practical. Can't have our queen collapsing from exhaustion." Marin set the basket down and lingered. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For thinking you wouldn't last a month here. For assuming you were just another rich girl playing at power." Marin's weathered face softened slightly. "You proved me wrong. You proved everyone wrong." After she left, Kayla sat staring at the bread, feeling something tight in her chest loosen. It wasn't love or even friendship exactly, but it was acceptance, and that mattered more than she'd expected. The storms lasted 3 weeks. When they finally broke, the sun emerged over a landscape transformed, everything buried under white, the world gone quiet and strange. Kayla stood at her chamber window watching the sunrise, feeling Draven's presence behind her. "Supply convoy from the settlement just arrived," he said. "They made it through the passes before they closed. Thera says they brought enough furs and preserved meat to keep us through the rest of winter." "They didn't have to do that." They did it anyway, because you gave them a reason to care whether we survive." Draven moved to stand beside her. "That settlement of yours is becoming a real community. They've built permanent structures, established farms. Thera's talking about setting up a council to handle disputes." "Good. That's what I hoped would happen." "It's also making some of the other territorial leaders nervous." Draven's tone shifted, becoming more serious. "Lord Hayne from the Western Territories sent a message yesterday. He wants a meeting, says he has concerns about our experimental policies." Kayla turned to face him. "He thinks helping exiles makes us look weak. He thinks it sets a dangerous precedent. If we stop treating exile as execution, other territories might demand the same. That undermines the traditional power structure." "The traditional power structure is what created the conspiracy that nearly destroyed us." "I know, but Hayne doesn't see it that way. He sees change as threat." Draven's expression was troubled. "He's calling a territorial council meeting in 3 weeks. All the major leaders will be there. They're going to challenge our policies, probably try to force us back to the old ways." "Can they do that?" "Technically, no. I'm the High King. What I say goes. But if enough territories unite against us, we could be looking at civil war." He met her eyes. "This isn't just about the settlement anymore, Kayla. It's about whether we can actually change how this entire region operates, or whether we're just postponing the inevitable." Kayla felt the weight of it settle over her. She'd been so focused on making the settlement work that she hadn't considered the larger implications. But Draven was right. They'd started something that couldn't be contained to just Shadowhold. Either it spread, or it died. "Then we need to make sure the other leaders see what we see," she said. "That this isn't weakness, it's evolution." "How do you propose we do that?" "By bringing them here. Let them see the fortress, see how the settlement trade is working, talk to people who've benefited from the changes. Words are easy to dismiss. Evidence is harder." Draven considered. "That's risky. Bringing all the territorial leaders here gives them a chance to conspire against us on our own ground. It also gives us home advantage, and it shows we're not afraid of their judgment." Kayla moved closer to him. "You've spent years keeping these territories united through strength, but strength alone won't work forever. Eventually, someone strong enough to challenge you will appear. When that happens, you need more than fear holding things together." "What do I need?" "Legitimacy. The kind that comes from people choosing to follow you, not just being forced to. Draven was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You've been thinking about this." "I think about a lot of things, usually around 3 in the morning when I can't sleep." He smiled at that. "All right, we'll host the Territorial Council here. Show them what we've built. And if they still want to fight, we'll deal with that too." The preparations took 2 weeks. Kayla coordinated everything. Guest quarters cleaned and prepared, food stores inventoried, trade goods from the settlement displayed prominently in the Great Hall. She wanted the visiting leaders to see prosperity, efficiency, and strength, not the chaos they were probably expecting. She also insisted on inviting Thera and several other settlement representatives. If they were going to defend the exile policy, the exiles themselves should have a voice. Draven had been skeptical. Territorial leaders aren't used to negotiating with people they consider beneath them. Then maybe it's time they learned. The leaders began arriving 5 days before the scheduled council meeting. Lord Hayne came first, a stocky man in his 60s with calculating eyes and a smile that never reached them. He greeted Draven with elaborate courtesy and Kayla with barely concealed contempt. "So this is the famous queen," he said, looking her up and down like she was livestock. "I've heard interesting stories." "I'm sure you have," Kayla replied evenly. "I hope the reality lives up to the rumors." "Oh, I suspect it will, one way or another." Lady Morvain arrived next, ruling the southern coastal territories. She was younger than Kayla expected, maybe 40, with sharp features and sharper intelligence. She assessed Kayla with a single glance and said, "You're the one who negotiated with exiles." "I am." "Interesting choice. Brave or foolish, I haven't decided which." "Why not both?" That got a small smile. "I think we'll get along, Queen Kayla." The other leaders trickled in over the following days. Lord Garrett from the northern mountains, Lady Shen from the eastern plains, Lord Torres from the central valleys. Each brought their own agendas, their own concerns, their own opinions about what Draven and Kayla had done. By the time the council meeting convened, the tension in the fortress was thick enough to cut. They gathered in the Great Hall, the same place where Castor had been tried, where the conspiracy had been exposed. The territorial leaders sat at a long table facing Draven's throne, with Kayla standing at his right. Behind them, officers and advisors lined the walls. At the back of the hall, Thera and 3 other settlement representatives stood quietly, their presence a statement in itself. Lord Hayne stood first, and Kayla knew immediately this was going to be bad. "King Draven," he began, his voice carrying false warmth, "we've come today because we're concerned about the direction your territory is taking. These experimental policies of yours threaten the stability we've all worked so hard to maintain." "What policies specifically concern you?" Draven's tone was neutral. "The exile settlement, primarily. By giving resources to people we've banished, you're undermining the very concept of punishment. Why should anyone fear exile if it's become a comfortable resettlement program?" "Comfortable?" Thera's voice cut through from the back of the hall. Everyone turned. "You think living in the borderlands with minimal supplies while learning to farm frozen ground is comfortable?" Hayne's face flushed. "I wasn't addressing you. No, you were talking about me, about us, without bothering to actually understand what we're building out there." Thera walked forward, her weathered face set with determination. "I was exiled for questioning corruption in the supply chain. Turns out I was right. The man responsible was executed for treason. But I couldn't come back because exile is supposed to be permanent, supposed to be death. Instead, Queen Kayla offered us a different option. Not comfort, not luxury. Just the chance to build something with our own hands." "The law exists for a reason," Hayne said coldly. "We can't have people thinking they can challenge authority without consequences." "I never said remove consequences," Kayla interjected. "I said change what those consequences look like. Exile still means losing your home, your status, your old life. It just doesn't have to mean death." Lady Morvain leaned forward. "And what do you gain from this arrangement?" "Trade goods, labor, allies instead of enemies." Kayla gestured to the displays along the walls. "The settlement produces furs, medicine, preserved food, all things we need. In exchange, they get tools, seeds, access to markets. Everyone benefits. Until they decide they want revenge for being exiled in the first place," Lord Garrett said. "You're building an army of people with grudges against us." Or we're building a community of people grateful for a second chance, Kayla countered. It depends on how we treat them. The debate went on for hours, voices rising and falling, arguments circling back on themselves. Kayla could see the divide forming. Some leaders were genuinely curious, asking practical questions about implementation. Others, like Hayne, were determined to see the settlement as a threat no matter what evidence she provided. Finally, as the sun began to set, Hayne stood again. I think we've heard enough. King Draven, the majority of territorial leaders present believe your exile policy is dangerous and should be discontinued immediately. We're asking you to dismantle the settlement and return to traditional practices. Draven's expression went cold. And if I refuse, then we'll be forced to reconsider our allegiance to your rule. The hall went deadly quiet. That was the threat Kayla had been dreading. Multiple territories breaking away, fracturing the unity Draven had spent years building. But before Draven could respond, Lady Morvayn stood. Speak for yourself, Hayne. You don't represent all of us. Hayne turned to her, surprised. You support this? I support innovation over stagnation. The old ways aren't working. We've had 3 border skirmishes in the past year because of exile groups turning to banditry. If Queen Kyla's settlement reduces that violence, I'm willing to try it. Lady Shen stood as well. I agree. My territory has been dealing with refugee problems for months. People fleeing harsh conditions, overwhelming our resources. A structured settlement program might actually help manage that. Lord Garrett remained seated but said, I'm not convinced this is wise, but I'm not ready to declare war over it either. That seems excessive. Hayne's face went purple with rage. You're all fools. You're letting a woman with no experience and no scent dictate policy that will destroy everything we've built. Watch your tone, Draven said quietly, but there was violence underneath the words. That's your queen you're insulting. She's your mistake, Hayne spat. Everyone knows it. The girl no one would choose, suddenly making decisions that affect entire territories? It's absurd. Kayla felt the familiar sting of that insult, but it didn't cut as deep as it once had. She'd heard worse, survived worse. You're right, she said calmly. I'm the girl no one would choose. I have no scent, no traditional power, no aristocratic background. Everything you think makes someone worthy to lead, I lack. Hayne smiled, thinking he'd won. But I'm also the person who caught a conspiracy when everyone else missed it, Kayla continued. Who negotiated peace with people you'd written off as dead. Who kept this fortress running through the worst winter in decades. So maybe traditional qualifications aren't the only things that matter. She walked down from the platform, moving to stand in front of the territorial leaders. You're all afraid of change because change is uncertain. But the old ways are breaking down. You can see it in the border violence, the resource shortages, the growing unrest. We can either adapt, or we can keep pretending everything's fine until it all collapses. And you think your settlement is the answer? Hayne demanded. I think it's a start. A proof that we can do things differently and have it work. Kayla met each leader's eyes in turn. King Draven unified these territories through strength, but strength alone is brittle. What we're building now, a system based on mutual benefit, on second chances, on solving problems instead of just punishing them, that's what makes unity last. Lord Torres, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's messy and complicated and will probably fail more times than it succeeds, but it's better than the alternative. Silence fell. The territorial leaders looked at each other, having silent conversations with glances and subtle gestures. Finally, Lady Morvayn said, I propose we implement a trial period, 6 months of the current exile settlement policy. If it works, we expand it to other territories. If it fails, we revisit the issue. I can support that, Lady Shen agreed. Lord Garrett nodded reluctantly. 6 months, but if there's violence from the settlement— There won't be, Thera interjected. We have as much invested in making this work as you do. Lord Torres considered, then nodded as well. Trial period. That's fair. All eyes turned to Lord Hayne. His expression was murderous, but he was outnumbered, and he knew it. Fine, he bit out. 6 months. But when this fails, I'll be the first to remind you all that I warned you. He stalked out of the hall, 2 of his advisors scrambling to follow. The remaining leaders began discussing implementation details, and Kayla felt Draven's hand settle on her shoulder. "Well done," he said quietly. "We didn't win. Not completely. Hayne's going to be a problem." Hayne was always going to be a problem, but you got the majority to support us, and you did it without me having to threaten anyone. That's progress. Over the next 3 days, the territorial leaders toured the fortress and visited the settlement. Kayla watched them interact with the exiles, saw their expression shift from skepticism to grudging respect as they realized these weren't desperate criminals, but people building functional lives. Lady Morvain pulled Kayla aside on the second day. "I underestimated you." "Most people do. That's going to be a useful advantage." Morvain's smile was calculating. "I want to establish a similar program in my territory. Would you be willing to consult?" "I'd be happy to." "Good. Because if this works, if we can actually reduce violence and turn exiles into productive members of society, it changes everything. Not just for our territories, but for the entire region." Kayla hadn't thought about it in those terms before. She'd been so focused on making the settlement work that she hadn't considered how it might spread, how it might fundamentally alter how their entire society functioned. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The territorial leaders left after the third day, most of them significantly more supportive than when they'd arrived. Hayne remained hostile, but he was isolated now, and everyone knew it. That night, Kayla found Draven in their chambers, staring out at the stars. "You're thinking," she said. "I'm always thinking." "About what?" "About how much things have changed since the choosing." He turned to face her. 6 months ago, I walked into that hall because I couldn't stand the noise anymore. I chose you because you were quiet, because you were the only person there who didn't make me want to claw my own skin off." "I remember. But that's not why I'd choose you now." He moved closer, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "I'd choose you now because you're brave and smart, and you see solutions where everyone else sees problems. Because you make me better, not just as a king, but as a person." Kayla felt tears prick her eyes. "Draven." "Let me finish." He took her hands. "I know this bond started as pragmatism, survival, not love, but somewhere along the way it became something else. At least for me. And I need to know if you feel the same or if I'm an idiot." Kayla looked at him, really looked at him. The terrifying warlord king who'd chosen her when no one else would, who'd defended her, challenged her, pushed her to become more than she'd ever thought possible, who slept beside her every night and whose presence had become as necessary as breathing. "You're not an idiot," she said softly, "at least not about this." She kissed him, and for the first time it wasn't just comfort or convenience. It was choosing him the way he'd chosen her, fully, deliberately, with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, Draven was smiling, really smiling. Not the cold expression he showed the world, but something genuine and warm. "So what happens now?" Kayla asked. "Now we keep building, keep changing things, keep proving everyone wrong." He pulled her close. "Together." "Together," Kayla agreed. The 6-month trial period came and went, and the settlement not only survived, but thrived. 2 more territories established similar programs. Border violence decreased by 40%. Trade networks expanded, bringing prosperity to regions that had been struggling for years. It wasn't perfect. There were incidents, fights, theft, one attempted attack that was quickly put down. But the overall trend was positive enough that even Lord Hayne couldn't argue against the evidence. The formal recognition came on the first anniversary of Kayla's arrival at Shadowhold. The Territorial Council convened again, this time not to challenge, but to officially endorse the exile settlement program as regional policy. They held the ceremony in the Great Hall, which had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. Representatives from every territory attended, along with settlement leaders and fortress residents. Kayla stood beside Draven's throne, wearing a dress of deep blue that Marin had helped her select. Her hair was pulled back, showing the scars she'd gotten during the coup attempt, a thin line along her jaw that she'd stopped trying to hide. Lady Morvain presented the formal declaration, reading it aloud for everyone to hear. When she finished, she looked at Kayla and said, "History will remember this as the moment we chose evolution over extinction, and it will remember you as the queen who made it possible." The hall erupted in applause. Not the forced courtesy Kayla had received in her early days, but genuine approval. People were standing, cheering, celebrating not just the policy but what it represented. Kayla felt overwhelmed, tears threatening despite her best efforts to maintain composure. Draven reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. "You did this," he said quietly, just for her. "We did this." "No, this was you. I provided the authority, but you provided the vision, the courage, the absolute stubbornness to make it work." He smiled. The girl no one would choose changed everything. After the ceremony, there was a feast that lasted well into the night. Kayla moved through the crowd, talking to people who'd once dismissed her, accepting congratulations from settlement representatives who'd become friends. Thera found her near midnight, both of them exhausted but happy. "Thank you," Thera said simply, "for giving us our lives back. You built those lives yourselves. I just provided an opportunity." "That's more than anyone else did." Thera hesitated, then said, "I have something for you. We all worked on it." She handed Kayla a package wrapped in cloth. Inside was a cloak, beautifully made from furs and leather, with intricate stitching along the edges. It must have taken months to create. "It's tradition in the settlement," Thera explained. "When someone does something significant, the community makes them a cloak, symbolizes being part of the group, being protected by it." Kayla ran her fingers over the soft fur, feeling the weight of it, the care that had gone into every stitch. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep fighting for people like us, people who get forgotten or cast aside. That's all we ask." "I will. I promise." As the celebration wound down and people began drifting away to their quarters, Kayla found herself back at the window in her chambers, looking out over the fortress. The settlement was too far to see from here, but she knew it was out there. Lights in the darkness, proof that change was possible. Draven came to stand beside her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different everything looks from here compared to a year ago. About how strange it is that the worst night of my life, standing in that line, being rejected by everyone, turned into the best thing that ever happened to me." You don't wish things had gone differently? That you'd been chosen by someone else? Someone easier?" Kayla turned in his arms to face him. "No, because anyone else would have tried to change me into what they wanted. You let me become who I was supposed to be." "Who you were supposed to be is terrifying," Draven said, but he was smiling. "You're going to keep pushing boundaries, aren't you? Keep challenging systems, demanding changes." "Probably. Is that a problem?" "It's exhausting, but I wouldn't have it any other way." They stood together in the quiet, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances, and built something neither had expected, a partnership that had changed not just them, but an entire region. Kayla thought about the girl she'd been at the choosing, invisible, forgotten, resigned to death. That girl would never have believed this future was possible, would never have imagined standing in a fortress as queen, respected by territorial leaders, loved by a king who'd been willing to break every tradition to choose her. But that girl hadn't had a choice. She'd had to become someone else to survive. And maybe that was the real lesson, that survival wasn't about staying the same. It was about adapting, evolving, becoming whoever you needed to be to make it through. The girl no one would choose had become the queen who changed everything. And in the end, that was more than enough. 5 years later, Kayla stood in the Great Hall again, but this time everything was different. The settlement program had expanded to all territories, reducing violence and creating prosperity where there had been only struggle. The exile system had been completely reformed, with review boards and rehabilitation programs replacing automatic banishment. Draven's rule had transformed from one based on fear to one based on respect and mutual benefit. The territories were still united, but now by choice rather than force. And Kayla, the girl with no scent, the woman everyone said would fail, had become the architect of a new system that would outlast them all. She'd proven that power didn't come from instinct or tradition or bloodline. It came from seeing what others couldn't, from having the courage to try something different, from refusing to accept that the way things were was the way they had to be. The fortress didn't call her the Ghost Queen anymore. They called her the Builder, the Bridge, the queen who'd turned enemies into allies and punishment into possibility. Draven came to stand beside her, their daughter, 3 years old, with her father's dark hair and her mother's quiet determination balanced on his hip. She's asking about the settlement again, he said. Wants to know if she can go visit. She's 3. She's stubborn, takes after her mother. Ooh, Kayla smiled and took their daughter from him. Maybe when she's older, when she can understand what it represents. And what does it represent? Hope. Second chances. The idea that no one should be thrown away just because they don't fit someone's idea of perfect. Their daughter squirmed down and ran off to play with the other children in the hall. Kayla watched her go, feeling the weight of everything they'd built, everything they'd changed. Do you ever regret it? Draven asked quietly. Taking the risk of accepting my choice that night? You could have refused, gone to the wastelands, maybe found your own path away from all of this. Kayla considered the question seriously. No, because this is my path. The one I was always supposed to walk, even if I didn't know it at the time. She looked up at him, this king who'd seen her when no one else had, who'd given her not just a title, but a purpose. You changed my life, she said, but I changed yours too. We made each other better. Yes, Draven agreed. We did. They stood together in the great hall, the place where Kayla had been tried and tested, where she'd fought and failed and ultimately succeeded. The place where she'd transformed from nothing into something that mattered. The girl no one would choose had become the queen who changed everything. And in doing so, she'd changed herself most of all. Outside the fortress walls, the settlement continued to grow. Inside, children played and families lived, and people built lives on foundations of opportunity rather than fear. The system wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was better, fairer, more humane. And that was enough. Kayla had spent her childhood being told she was broken because she had no scent, that she was defective, unwanted, destined for nothing. But she'd learned something those people never understood, that absence could be as powerful as presence, that silence could be louder than noise, that being different didn't mean being less. It just meant being ready for a world that didn't exist yet. She'd helped build that world, stone by stone, choice by choice, day by day. And standing in the great hall with her family around her and her life's work spreading beyond the fortress walls, Kayla finally understood what she'd been searching for all along. Not acceptance, though she had that now. Not power, though she wielded it. Not even love, though she'd found that too. What she'd been searching for was meaning, purpose, the knowledge that her life mattered, that the girl who'd stood at the end of that terrible line had become someone who changed the world. She'd found it, built it with her own hands and her own choices. The girl no one would choose had chosen herself. And in the end, that was the only choice that really mattered.